In this video, we'll be breaking down every moment Quagmire went too far throughout Family Guy. Let's get started. First up, we got Blind Ambition, Season 4, Episode 3. Spying on Lois in the ladies' room and planning to molest an unconscious woman. Quagmire, hiding in the bathroom ceiling to watch women use the toilet, represents one of those moments where Family Guy takes a character trait and cranks it up to felony levels. The show had already established Glenn Quagmire as the neighborhood's walking sexual harassment lawsuit, but this episode decided to answer the question nobody asked. What happens when you give a cartoon pervert the stealth abilities of a Mission Impossible character and the moral compass of a broken sundial? The whole situation kicks off at a bowling alley, which is already the most depressing setting for anything that doesn't involve league night and cheap beer. Peter and his friends are hanging out with Mort Goldman, who somehow bowls a perfect game because apparently the writers decided that the nervous Jewish pharmacist needed a random moment of athletic glory. While the guys are celebrating Mort's inexplicable bowling prowess, Lois heads to the ladies' restroom for what should have been a completely normal, uneventful bathroom visit. Instead, she gets the kind of experience that would make anyone consider installing a Ring camera in public restrooms. Lois does the thing every germaphobe does in public bathrooms. She starts carefully placing toilet paper on the seat, creating that protective barrier between herself and whatever horrors have touched that porcelain throne before her. During this completely mundane act of bathroom hygiene, she keeps hearing someone muttering, "Giggity." For context, giggity is Quagmire's signature catchphrase, which he says whenever anything even remotely sexual crosses his mind, so basically every 3 seconds. Hearing this while you're trying to use a public toilet is like hearing the Jaws theme while you're swimming in the ocean. Nothing good can possibly come from it. Lois probably assumes she's hallucinating at first. Maybe she's been around Peter too long and his stupidity is becoming contagious. Maybe the fumes from whatever cleaning product they use at the bowling alley are causing auditory hallucinations. But then she hears it again and again. Finally, she does what any rational person would do in this situation, and what every horror movie victim should do, but never does. She looks up. Suspended from the ceiling like some kind of perverted Spider-Man is Glenn Quagmire, just hanging there, watching her. He's positioned himself above the bathroom stalls like a predatory bird, except instead of hunting for mice, he's hunting for the opportunity to violate every woman's privacy, and probably several state and federal laws. The fact that he managed to get up there in the first place raises so many questions. Did he bring climbing equipment? Has he been doing this regularly enough that he's developed the upper body strength of a rock climber? Does the bowling alley not have maintenance people who check the ceilings? The answer to that last question is probably no, because this is Family Guy, and infrastructure maintenance doesn't exist in Quahog. The immediate aftermath of this discovery leads to exactly what you'd expect. Lois teams up with Loretta Brown and Bonnie Swanson, forming the Quahog equivalent of the Avengers. Except instead of fighting Thanos, they're fighting for the right to use a public bathroom without a middle-aged man watching them from the ceiling tiles. The three women band together and demand Quagmire's eviction from the neighborhood, which seems like a pretty reasonable request when your neighbor has turned Peeping Tom into an Olympic sport. Peter, being Peter, protests this decision. His objection to kicking out a literal criminal from the neighborhood showcases the kind of loyalty that would be admirable if it weren't being applied to defending someone who treats women's restrooms like his personal movie theater. Peter decides he can reform Quagmire, which is like saying you can train a piranha to be a vegetarian. Some things are just fundamentally opposed to their nature, and expecting Quagmire to respect women's privacy is like expecting a fish to suddenly develop lungs and start breathing air. Peter's reform plan involves what can only be described as psychological torture disguised as therapy. He sets up an intensive conditioning therapy session that consists of placing a whirling ceiling fan directly above Quagmire's nude groin while showing him a Victoria's Secret catalog. This is basically the Clockwork Orange treatment, except instead of trying to cure someone of violent tendencies, Peter is trying to condition Quagmire to associate sexual arousal with the very real possibility of losing his reproductive capabilities to high-speed rotating blades. The fact that this somehow works says more about Family Guy's universe than it does about actual psychology, because in the real world, this would just create someone with a very specific and concerning fan-related trauma. After what we can assume is several sessions of genital-threatening behavior modification, Glenn appears to be functioning like a normal member of society again. He's supposedly cured, reformed, ready to rejoin civilization without immediately committing acts that would require him to introduce himself to all his neighbors for legal reasons. To test this supposed transformation, Peter and the guys take him to the local mall, which is essentially like taking a recovering alcoholic to a brewery and hoping for the best. The mall proves to be exactly the challenge you'd expect. Quagmire immediately faces a series of increasingly provocative situations that seem specifically designed to test his newfound self-control. First, there are scantily clad cheerleaders splashing water at each other and making out, which is the kind of thing that only happens in teenage boys' fantasies, and apparently at the Quahog Mall. Then there's a mother breastfeeding her baby, which is literally just a woman feeding her child, but Quagmire treats it like it's part of his temptation trial. The fact that he can't differentiate between actual sexual situations and a mother performing basic childcare duties shows that Peter's ceiling fan therapy maybe didn't address all the underlying issues. Overwhelmed by all these situations, and probably questioning why the universe decided to throw every possible test at him in the span of 15 minutes, Glenn flees the scene. He runs away from the cheerleaders, away from the nursing mother, away from any situation that might trigger his apparently very fragile self-control. But here's where the episode takes a turn that could only happen in a show where logic goes to die. Quagmire doesn't run outside. He doesn't go hide in his car. He doesn't seek refuge in the food court, where the most provocative thing would be someone eating a Cinnabon. Instead, he somehow ends up in the mall's security control room. The security control room is filled with dozens of closed-circuit television monitors. Normal security rooms show parking lots, entrances, maybe the jewelry store to prevent theft. But in Quahog's Mall, apparently the security system is entirely focused on women's dressing rooms. Every single monitor shows a different dressing room camera angle, which raises the question of what kind of mall security operation is running this place. Probably the same people who hired Quagmire's ceiling installation consultant at the bowling alley. For someone who just fled temptation, Quagmire has managed to stumble into the equivalent of winning the terrible person lottery. While staring at these monitors like a kid in a candy store, except the candy is illegal surveillance and basic human decency, Quagmire sees something that actually matters. A woman collapses in one of the dressing rooms. In what the episode describes as a heroic act, Glenn rushes to her location and saves her life, which earns him praise and recognition as a neighborhood hero. The show's narrator doesn't let us forget the truth, though. The transcript explicitly states he became a hero, even though he was just using the opportunity to take advantage of her. Let that sink in for a moment. Quagmire saved a woman's life, which is objectively a good thing, but his motivation for being in a position to save her in the first place was because he was watching illegal surveillance footage of women changing clothes. He stumbled into heroism while actively committing a crime. The woman's medical emergency happened to interrupt what was otherwise just another episode of Quagmire, violating privacy laws and basic human decency. The fact that everyone treats him like a hero afterward, completely ignoring how he ended up in that security room in the first place, represents the show's commentary on how society sometimes celebrates the outcome while conveniently forgetting the questionable path that led there. The long-term impact of these events plays out exactly as you'd expect in Family Guy. Quagmire faces zero real consequences for any of his actions. He doesn't get arrested for the bathroom ceiling incident. Nobody questions why he was in a security room full of dressing room cameras. He doesn't have to register as anything or face any legal repercussions. Instead, he gets treated like a hero because he happened to save someone's life while being a creep. The women who initially wanted him evicted apparently just forget about the whole bathroom situation Probably because the show needed to move on to Peter's nickel-eating storyline and couldn't spend more time dealing with the logical consequences of having a sex offender living in the neighborhood. Peter's attempt at reformation through genital-threatening therapy obviously failed spectacularly. The ceiling fan treatment didn't cure Quagmire of anything except maybe his fear of Home Depot appliances. All it did was make him temporarily suppress his worst impulses until he found himself in an environment where he could indulge them without rotating blades threatening his ability to have children. The episode presents this as a somewhat lighthearted story about a perverted neighbor and his friend's attempts to help him, but when you actually break down what happens, it reads like a crime documentary waiting to happen. The broader message here, if there is one beyond just shock humor, seems to be about how communities handle problematic members. The women rightfully wanted Quagmire removed from the neighborhood. Peter and the guys, through a combination of male solidarity and astounding stupidity, decided he deserved another chance. The reformation attempt was superficial at best and actively harmful at worst. And in the end, Quagmire's accidental heroism allowed everyone to paper over his pattern of predatory behavior and pretend everything worked out fine. Nobody learned anything, nobody faced real consequences, and life in Quahog continued with a ceiling-climbing bathroom spy still living next door to his victims. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire, Season 4, Episode 5, Sleeping with Cleveland's wife, Loretta, and destroying their marriage. Sleeping with your best friend's wife represents a pretty clear line that most people understand you shouldn't cross. It's not a complicated moral equation. It's not some nuanced ethical dilemma that requires a philosophy degree to parse out. But Quagmire apparently looked at that line, shrugged, and decided it was more of a gentle suggestion than an actual boundary, because in The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire, he manages to take his already questionable character and launch it into orbit straight past the moon. The whole situation starts on Peter's fishing boat during what's supposed to be a casual party at sea with the guys. Everyone's hanging out, having a good time, doing normal fishing boat activities that don't involve destroying decades-long friendships. Quagmire is fishing, minding his own business for once in his life, when he catches a fish. The fish does what fish do when they're yanked out of the water against their will. It flops around, probably wondering what terrible life choices led to this moment, and ends up landing directly in Loretta Brown's shirt. Now, here's where a normal person would probably say something like, "Oh, let me help you," and then wait for the woman to handle extracting the fish herself, or maybe offer to get a towel, or literally do anything that doesn't involve putting your hands where they absolutely should not go. But Loretta, in what can only be described as the setup for the worst possible decision tree, invites Quagmire to reach into her shirt and grab the fish himself. She basically opens the door, holds it wide, and puts up a neon sign saying, "Terrible choices this way," while Quagmire's hand is literally between Loretta's breasts, supposedly fishing around for an actual fish, which is already a sentence that should never need to be written about a married woman and her husband's friend. Cleveland approaches. He mentions the snacks Peter has supplied for the party. He serenely says hello to Glenn. Then he just walks away. Cleveland witnesses his wife with another man's hand down her shirt, and his reaction is basically, "Oh hey, nice weather we're having. Did you see the chips?" This moment should have been a warning sign the size of a billboard that something deeply wrong was happening in the Brown marriage, but everyone apparently decided to ignore it like it was just another Tuesday in Quahog. After the fish is finally extracted, and we can only hope someone threw that traumatized fish back into the ocean where it could tell its fish friends about the horrible things it witnessed, Loretta does something that crosses every possible line. She propositions Quagmire. Not in a subtle way, not in a maybe there's some ambiguity here way. She straight up propositions him. The transcript describes Quagmire's reaction as amazed confusion, which is probably the most restrained response he's ever had to anything sexual in his entire life. Even Quagmire, whose entire personality revolves around being aggressively sexual with anything that moves, seems momentarily confused by a married woman, specifically his friend's wife, making this kind of offer. The episode then takes a detour into a CPR subplot because someone needed to pad the runtime and apparently decided that Joe Swanson nearly drowning while playing charades was the way to do it. Joe falls overboard while attempting to portray Natalie Wood, which is both darkly comedic and completely irrelevant to the main story, but it leads to the Griffin family taking CPR classes. Peter almost instantly gets his CPR card revoked for inappropriate behavior, which tracks with literally everything we know about Peter Griffin. This whole subplot exists mainly to delay the inevitable moment when someone discovers what Quagmire is about to do. While Peter is pondering whether to take the CPR course again, spoiler alert, he probably shouldn't be allowed anywhere near emergency medical procedures. He and Brian hear screams coming from Cleveland's house. They rush in, probably expecting to find some kind of emergency, maybe a fire or a medical situation, or literally anything other than what they actually discover. Instead, they find Loretta having sex on the couch with a white man who has a tattoo on his buttocks. The episode specifically mentions that Peter and Brian are embarrassed and leave without seeing the man's face, but then Quagmire raises his head from the sofa immediately afterward. Let's pause here to really appreciate what Quagmire did. He didn't just have a one-time moment of weakness, he didn't accidentally kiss his friend's wife at a party and immediately regret it. He went to Cleveland's house, in Cleveland's home, on Cleveland's couch, and had sex with Cleveland's wife. The disrespect isn't just about betraying a friend. It's about doing it in the most brazenly disrespectful location possible. He might as well have worn a shirt that said, "I don't care about your feelings, your marriage, or basic human decency." Peter and Brian decide that the last thing in the world they should do is tell anyone about this discovery. So naturally, after doing everything in the world in one day, which is the show's way of saying they procrastinated on having a difficult conversation by literally doing every other possible activity first, they tell Lois, the Swansons, and Quagmire that Loretta is having an affair. The fact that they tell Quagmire is particularly funny in a dark way, because he has to sit there and pretend to be shocked by news that he is personally responsible for creating. Peter volunteers to tell Cleveland because he claims to have experience with delivering bad news. Meeting Cleveland at the Drunken Clam with Brian, Peter delivers the news in an overly detailed fashion. Most friends would try to soften the blow, maybe ease into it, be gentle with information that's going to destroy someone's marriage and self-esteem. Peter apparently decides that the best approach is to give Cleveland every single detail, painting a vivid picture of his wife's infidelity that Cleveland absolutely did not need or ask for. Cleveland's reaction to learning his wife is cheating on him is to calmly question Loretta about the affair. He doesn't yell. He doesn't break things. He just asks her about it in his usual mild-mannered Cleveland way. Loretta responds by angrily telling him she needs a real man, which is basically kicking someone when they're already down and then backing up the car to make sure you really got them. Cleveland apologizes because apparently, even in the face of his wife's affair, he thinks maybe he's somehow at fault. Loretta, unsatisfied with his measured response, kicks him out of the house in disgust. She cheated on him, but she's mad that he isn't mad enough about her cheating on him, which is the kind of twisted logic that only exists in dysfunctional relationships and Family Guy episodes. The Griffins invite Cleveland to stay at their house because that's what friends do when your wife destroys your marriage. Lois notices that Cleveland doesn't seem affected by any of this. He's not crying. He's not angry. He's not showing any emotion at all. Peter, being Peter, decides that what Cleveland needs is a revenge lay, because nothing solves the emotional devastation of infidelity like more questionable sexual decisions. Peter decides to ask Quagmire for advice on how to help Cleveland get this revenge lay, which is like asking an arsonist for tips on fire safety. When Peter and Brian arrive at Quagmire's house to ask for this advice, they find him working out in revealing leopard skin briefs. The moment they see him, they instantly recognize the tattoo on his butt. The same tattoo they saw on the mystery man who was having sex with Loretta on Cleveland's couch. In that moment, everything clicks into place. Glenn Quagmire, their friend, the guy they were literally coming to for advice on how to help Cleveland, was the one who destroyed Cleveland's marriage. Despite Quagmire's pleas, and we can only imagine what those pleas sounded like, probably some combination of, "It's not what it looks like," and "She came onto me," neither of which is an actual defense for sleeping with your friend's wife. Peter and Brian immediately tell Cleveland they expect some kind of explosive reaction, anger, violence, tears, something that shows Cleveland is processing this new information that his wife didn't just cheat on him with anyone, but specifically with one of his closest friends. Instead, Cleveland shows almost no reaction at all. He just absorbs the information like he's being told the weather forecast. Lois tries to explain to Cleveland that Loretta wants him to express his feelings, that women sometimes want men to be strong and stand up for them. She gets so caught up in her own motivational speech that she becomes aroused, drops her pants to show her pink thong. The episode specifically notes she typically wears panties, making this moment particularly out of character, and asks Peter to spank her. Brian, apparently lost in the moment too, smacks her butt instead. After a moment of awkward silence where everyone processes what just happened, Peter tries to refocus on helping Cleveland feel something, anything, about his situation. Peter takes Cleveland to a wrestling match, presumably hoping that watching people beat each other up will inspire Cleveland to want to beat up Quagmire. The wrestling match affects Peter way more than Cleveland, which leads to Peter trying a more direct approach. He puts on a Quagmire mask and molests Brian. Let's really sit with how desperate this plan is. Peter is so determined to make Cleveland angry that he's willing to sexually assault his dog while wearing his other friend's face. This is the kind of plan that should have stayed in the terrible ideas folder and never seen the light of day. But it works. This is what finally breaks through Cleveland's calm exterior. Seeing Peter dressed as Quagmire molest Brian makes Cleveland become enraged enough to vow to kill Quagmire. Peter immediately realizes he's gone too far with his motivational techniques, which, yes, molesting your dog in a Quagmire mask definitely qualifies as going too far, and tries to protect Glenn by hiding him at Mayor Adam West's mansion. Mayor West's brand of lunacy proves too much even for Quagmire, who has seen and done some truly disturbing things over the course of this show. When the mayor's insanity becomes unbearable, Quagmire returns home and calls Cleveland to apologize. Cleveland shows up at Quagmire's house, chasing him around while wielding a baseball bat. This is the confrontation everyone has been waiting for. Cleveland finally has the opportunity to make Quagmire pay for betraying him in the worst possible way. When Cleveland finally has Glenn at his mercy, cowering on the lawn, he realizes something about himself. He's unable to hurt another living person, no matter how badly they hurt him first. It's a character-defining moment that shows Cleveland's fundamental goodness, even in the face of ultimate betrayal. But it also highlights just how far Quagmire went, because he knew his friend well enough to know that Cleveland wouldn't actually hurt him, and he did it anyway. Peter tricks Loretta into seeing Cleveland, probably hoping for some kind of emotional reconciliation where they work through their issues and save their marriage. Instead, the couple angrily agrees to divorce. There's no tearful reunion, no promises to try harder, just two people who realize their marriage is dead and there's no point in trying to resurrect it. Quagmire's actions didn't just cause temporary drama. He permanently destroyed a family. Cleveland and Loretta's son, Cleveland Jr., now has to grow up in a broken home because Quagmire couldn't keep it in his pants. The episode ends with Cleveland and Quagmire apologizing to each other and, at Glenn's insistence, taking out their aggressions on each other in a boxing ring. They punch each other, work through their issues with violence, and apparently everything is supposed to be okay now. But here's what the show glosses over. Cleveland lost his wife, his marriage, his home, and his family structure because his friend decided that one night of sex was worth more than their friendship. Quagmire got to apologize, take a few punches, and move on with his life relatively unchanged. Cleveland's life was completely upended, and the best resolution anyone could come up with was, let's hit each other and call it even. The long-term consequences of Quagmire's actions extend far beyond this episode. Cleveland eventually moves to Virginia to start over, leading to his own spin-off show. The divorce becomes a permanent part of the Family Guy universe. Cleveland and Loretta's relationship never recovers. All because Quagmire saw his friend's wife make a terrible decision and decided to enthusiastically participate rather than be an actual friend and shut it down. He had multiple opportunities to stop. After the fishing boat incident, he could have told Loretta no. When she showed up at his door, he could have turned her away. At any point during their affair, he could have come clean to Cleveland. Instead, he kept going until Peter and Brian literally caught him in the act. This episode represents Quagmire at his absolute worst, which is saying something for a character whose entire personality is built around being morally questionable. He didn't just cross a line, he obliterated it, set the remains on fire, and then did a little dance in the ashes. The show tries to wrap everything up with a neat bow by having the friends reconcile, but there's no actual accountability. Quagmire faces no real consequences beyond Cleveland chasing him around with a baseball bat one time. He doesn't lose his friends. He doesn't become a pariah in the neighborhood. Life just goes on, except now Cleveland is divorced and Quagmire can add home wrecker to his already impressive list of terrible qualities. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to I Take Thee Quagmire, Season 4, Episode 21, marrying Joan in days, then faking his own death to escape the relationship. Most people take at least a few months, maybe even years, to figure out if they want to marry someone. They date, they get to know each other's habits, they meet each other's families, they have those important conversations about life goals and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It's a process. But Quagmire apparently looked at that entire social convention and decided it was more of a suggestion than a requirement because he meets a maid named Joan and proposes to her in what appears to be a matter of days, maybe weeks at most. Then, when he realizes marriage isn't just an extended one-night stand with paperwork, he decides the most reasonable solution is to fake his own death rather than, have an adult conversation. The whole situation starts when Peter makes a surprise win on Wheel of Fortune. Instead of winning cash or a car or literally any other normal prize, Peter wins a free maid for a week. While Peter is showing off how he can make huge messes for this woman to clean up, because Peter, treating service workers with respect, is apparently not in his programming, the maid meets Quagmire. In a shocking turn of events that contradicts literally everything we know about Glenn Quagmire's character up to this point, he immediately falls for her. Not falls in lust, not sees her as another conquest. Actually falls for her in what appears to be a genuine emotional connection. Quagmire gives up his philandering ways and becomes a caring lover. This is the same man who has spent every episode up until this point treating women like collectible trading cards. The same guy who hid in bathroom ceilings and slept with his friend's wife. Suddenly, he's acting like he's discovered what love is for the first time in his life, all because he met a maid who was hired to clean Peter Griffin's disaster of a house. He proposes to Joan at the seashore at sunset, which is actually kind of romantic if you ignore the fact that they've known each other for approximately 5 minutes in television time. Here's where Quagmire's first major mistake becomes apparent. He doesn't just date Joan for a while to see if this feeling is real. He doesn't suggest they live together first or have a long engagement to make sure they're compatible. He goes straight from nice to meet you to let's get married with the kind of reckless speed that would make even Las Vegas wedding chapels say, maybe slow down there, buddy. This is a man who has never shown any ability to maintain a long-term relationship, suddenly deciding he's ready for permanent commitment based on feelings that are probably less than 2 weeks old. Peter becomes irritated by the changes Quagmire has made for his new fiancée. Quagmire is no longer the bachelor party guy who shows up ready to make questionable decisions. He's domesticated, committed, thinking about someone other than himself for possibly the first time in his adult life. Peter, being Peter, decides this is a problem that needs fixing. He tries to get Quagmire back into his old ways by taking him to bachelor party strip clubs, which is already a weird move when your friend is about to get married and seems happy about it. Peter's attempts to corrupt Quagmire escalate to truly absurd levels. He tries to activate Quagmire's foot fetish by acquiring the actual foot of the Statue of Liberty. Not a replica, not a model. He somehow gets the actual foot from the Statue of Liberty, which raises so many questions about national security and monument preservation that we don't have time to address. The episode specifically mentions that Peter spends thousands of dollars and calls many people he doesn't even know trying to make this happen. All of this effort is dedicated to preventing his friend from being happy in a committed relationship, which says a lot about Peter's priorities and approximately nothing good about his understanding of friendship. Despite Peter's extensive and expensive efforts to sabotage Quagmire's personal growth, none of it works. Quagmire remains committed to Joan. He's going through with the wedding. He's apparently serious about changing his life and becoming a better person. Everything seems to be heading toward a surprisingly wholesome ending, where the neighborhood pervert actually grows as a character and finds genuine happiness. And then the wedding reception happens. During the reception, Quagmire turns back into his old self when he notices Lois's engorged breasts. The episode specifically states this happens due to Peter's actions, referencing a subplot where Lois has been breastfeeding Stewie, and Peter has somehow made the situation worse because Peter making situations worse is basically his superpower. Quagmire sees Lois's chest, and suddenly all that character development evaporates like water on hot pavement. Years of ingrained behavior patterns come flooding back. He remembers who he actually is underneath this thin veneer of commitment and personal growth. In that moment at his own wedding reception, surrounded by friends and family, having just made permanent vows to Joan, Quagmire has a crystal clear realization. He made a huge mistake. He's not ready for marriage. He probably never was ready for marriage. The feelings he thought were love were likely just a temporary deviation from his normal pattern of behavior, possibly caused by meeting someone at a vulnerable moment or just being bored with his usual routine. Whatever genuine emotions he felt for Joan weren't strong enough to override his fundamental nature, which apparently can be completely derailed by seeing his friend's wife's engorged breasts at a wedding reception. Realizing his mistake, Quagmire tries to break up with Joan. This is the moment where a normal person would sit down with their brand new spouse and say something like, "I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was ready for this, but I'm not. We should get this marriage annulled." It would be an incredibly difficult and painful conversation, absolutely devastating for Joan, but it would be the honest and adult way to handle the situation. Quagmire apparently doesn't consider this option for even a second. Joan's response to Quagmire trying to break up with her immediately reveals that this relationship maybe wasn't as healthy as it appeared. She threatens to kill him and then herself if he leaves her. This is not normal behavior. This is not the response of someone who is mentally stable and ready for marriage. Joan goes from seemingly sweet maid who fell for Quagmire to someone making murder-suicide threats in the span of one conversation. Either she was hiding these tendencies throughout their entire courtship, or Quagmire is so self-absorbed that he never noticed any red flags about the woman he proposed to after knowing her for less time than it takes most people to finish a Netflix series. Faced with death threats from his new wife, Quagmire does what any rational person would do. Just kidding. He enlists help from his friends to fake his own death, because apparently having a difficult conversation is more terrifying than staging an elaborate hoax that could land everyone involved in serious legal trouble. He asks his friends for help getting out of the marriage quickly. At one point, he asks Cleveland how he got out of his marriage. Cleveland reminds him that he slept with Loretta, which is a brutal callback to Quagmire, destroying Cleveland's marriage in a previous episode. The fact that Quagmire has the audacity to ask Cleveland for marriage advice after being the direct cause of Cleveland's divorce shows a level of self-awareness that rivals a brick wall. The friends decide to fake Quagmire's death, which is a plan that could only be conceived by people who have never heard of death certificates, insurance fraud, or basic logic. They make a video of Quagmire being attacked by an increasingly absurd series of assailants. First, there's a handicapped ninja, because apparently, even in their fake death video, they wanted to include some offensive stereotypes. Then a Nazi with a ray gun, which is both historically inaccurate and scientifically impossible. then a pots and pans robot, which sounds like something a child would draw. Finally, Quagmire's body gets mauled by a dinosaur, which really seals the deal on this being the least believable death video ever created. The video fails to convince Joan, which is absolutely shocking to no one except apparently Quagmire and his friends. Joan looks at this video that features Nazis with ray guns and dinosaurs and decides it's not credible evidence of her husband's death. Either she's smarter than everyone gave her credit for, or she's seen enough of Quagmire's behavior to know that he's exactly the kind of person who would fake his death to get out of a marriage he regrets after approximately 1 day. They move on to Plan B, which somehow manages to be even more elaborate than Plan A. The plan involves having Quagmire come home and have a sudden heart attack. They're going to stage a medical emergency in front of his wife, presumably have a fake funeral, and then Quagmire can just live somewhere else under an assumed name for the rest of his life, like some kind of witness protection program for men with commitment issues. The amount of effort going into avoiding one difficult conversation is genuinely impressive in the worst possible way. Their plan hits what the episode calls a chink when Mayor Adam West announces that Quagmire's coffin is going to be covered with concrete. West believes this will guard against zombies, which is exactly the kind of reasoning you'd expect from Mayor West. But this creates a real problem for the fake death plan, because concrete covering the coffin will prevent them from digging up Quagmire later. Quagmire is going to be permanently entombed in concrete because the mayor is worried about a zombie apocalypse, which means Quagmire's elaborate plan to fake his death will result in him actually being trapped underground forever. Faced with the prospect of being buried alive in concrete, Peter reveals that Quagmire is alive. He just announces it right there at the funeral in front of everyone. Joan is relieved, which makes sense because she just found out her husband isn't actually dead. But then things take a turn that's dark, even by Family Guy standards. Death shows up. The actual anthropomorphic personification of death appears and announces that he came to collect a body, and he must collect a body. Someone has to die because death answered the call. Joan makes a decision that reveals just how deeply disturbed she was. She jumps in front of Quagmire and touches death, which kills her instantly. She literally sacrifices herself to save Quagmire's life, which would be romantic if it weren't so completely tragic. This woman married Quagmire after a whirlwind romance, threatened to kill them both when he tried to leave, and then actually died to save him when death came calling. Her entire relationship with Quagmire, from start to finish, was a disaster built on rushed decisions and unstable foundations. Quagmire's friends informed Death that Joan's last name was Quagmire, meaning she took his name when they got married, and that she was suicidal, referencing her earlier threat to kill herself if he left. Death accepts this explanation and takes her body, which means Joan's death is being classified as suicide rather than sacrifice, which adds another layer of darkness to an already grim situation. The woman died saving her husband, who was actively trying to escape their marriage through fraud. And her death gets written off as suicide because she had previously made suicidal threats. Before Death leaves with Joan's body, Quagmire asks him to leave the body for 5 minutes. The episode doesn't explicitly state what Quagmire wants those 5 minutes for, but given everything we know about his character and the fact that he's asking for time alone with his dead wife's body, the implication is deeply disturbing. This is the final moment that shows Quagmire hasn't learned anything. His wife just died saving his life, and his immediate response is to ask if he can have some private time with her corpse. Even in death, even after all the chaos he caused, he can't manage to show basic respect or human decency. The long-term consequences of Quagmire's actions in this episode are almost unfathomable. He met a woman, rushed into marriage without really knowing her, discovered she was unstable enough to make murder-suicide threats, tried to fake his death rather than face his mistake, and ended up causing her actual death. Joan is dead because Quagmire couldn't control his impulses long enough to make it through his own wedding reception without objectifying his friend's wife. She's dead because he was too cowardly to have an honest conversation about his feelings, and instead chose to stage an elaborate fake death that spiraled completely out of control. Quagmire faces no real consequences for any of this. He doesn't go to jail for fraud. He doesn't face social exile from the neighborhood. His friends don't stop associating with him, despite the fact that he got a woman killed through his own selfishness and incompetence. Life just goes on for Glenn Quagmire, now conveniently single again, free to return to his old patterns without the burden of commitment or personal growth. He attempted one of the most extreme measures possible to escape a relationship, got someone killed in the process, and walked away basically unscathed. This episode represents Quagmire at peak terrible decision-making. Most people's worst relationship mistakes involve maybe dating someone incompatible or staying too long in a bad situation. Quagmire's worst relationship mistake involved marriage fraud, faking his death, and ultimately causing his wife's actual death. He took a situation that could have been resolved with one difficult conversation and turned it into a tragedy that ended with someone dead and him asking for 5 minutes alone with the body. That's not just going too far. That's launching yourself past too far, orbiting around catastrophically terrible, and landing squarely in, how is this person not in prison territory? Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Quagmire's Baby Season 8, Episode 6. Quagmire tries to abandon his infant daughter Anna Lee multiple times, including leaving her at a fire station. Finding a baby on your doorstep is one of those life-changing moments that forces people to make hard decisions about responsibility, commitment, and what kind of person they want to be. Most people in that situation would either step up and become a parent or immediately contact child services to ensure the baby gets proper care. Quagmire apparently looked at those two reasonable options and decided to pursue a third path. Keep the baby just long enough to realize she interferes with his sex life, then give her away when parenting becomes inconvenient. Then, just to add an extra layer of disturbing to the whole situation, he makes a comment about potentially meeting her again in 18 years when she's legal, because apparently, even discovering you have a daughter doesn't inspire enough personal growth to stop being creepy. The whole situation starts at a garage sale Quagmire is having, which already seems like a weird setup for discovering you have a child. He's selling his old stuff, trying to make some quick cash, living his normal Quagmire life. Peter shows up and buys an old radio, which leads to a whole subplot about Peter thinking he can talk to the dead, but actually just reaching Rich Little. 7 weeks later, when Peter still can't get the radio to work and wants his money back, he goes to Quagmire to demand a refund. While they're arguing about whether Quagmire should return Peter's money for a garage sale radio that doesn't work, they both see something that immediately derails the conversation. There's a basket with a baby in it. The baby appears on Quagmire's doorstep with presumably some kind of note or indication that she's his daughter, because Quagmire doesn't question whether the baby is related to him. He just accepts that yes, this is his child, the product of one of his countless sexual encounters, coming back to literally show up on his doorstep in a basket. The mother, whoever she is, has decided she either can't or won't raise this baby and has chosen to leave her with the father. This should be a wake-up call for Quagmire about the consequences of his lifestyle, a moment where he realizes that treating every sexual encounter as meaningless fun can result in actual human beings who need care and support. Quagmire names the baby Anna Lee, which shows he at least attempts some level of personal connection with her. He doesn't just call her the baby or immediately hand her over to authorities. He gives her a name, which is typically what parents do when they're accepting a child into their lives. For a brief moment, it seems like maybe Quagmire is going to step up and become a father. Maybe this baby will be the thing that finally makes him grow as a person and develop some sense of responsibility beyond his own immediate gratification. The episode specifically states that Quagmire desperately tries to take care of Anna Lee. The word desperately is important here because it suggests he's genuinely attempting to be a parent, even though he has no idea what he's doing. He's not immediately abandoning her. He's trying to figure out how to incorporate this baby into his life. But here's where everything falls apart. Anna Lee does what all babies do. She cries. Babies cry when they're hungry, when they're tired, when they need their diapers changed, when they're uncomfortable, or sometimes for no reason at all. It's literally how babies communicate their needs because they can't talk yet. The problem is that Annalee's crying ruins Quagmire's sexual relationships. The episode explicitly states this is the reason he decides to give her away for adoption. Not because he can't afford to raise her, not because he doesn't have the time or resources, not because he thinks she'd be better off with a two-parent family who planned for a child. He decides to give up his daughter because her crying interferes with his ability to have sex with random women. Let that sink in for a moment. Quagmire values his ability to maintain his pattern of casual sexual encounters more than he values raising his own child. This decision reveals everything about Quagmire's priorities and his fundamental inability to put anyone else's needs before his own desires. A baby crying during sex is inconvenient. Sure, but that's what being a parent means. It means accepting that your life is no longer just about you. It means making sacrifices. It means understanding that a helpless infant's needs trump your want to maintain the same lifestyle you had before becoming a parent. Quagmire apparently didn't get that memo, or more likely, he got it and decided it didn't apply to him. The fact that he makes this decision so quickly suggests he never really committed to being Annalee's father in the first place. He tried it out, like someone test driving a car, and when he discovered that parenthood requires actual sacrifice and lifestyle changes, he decided to return the baby like defective merchandise. Annalee isn't even old enough to have developed any kind of personality or bond with Quagmire. She's just a crying infant who needs basic care, and that's too much for him to handle when it conflicts with his sex life. Quagmire arranges for Annalee to be adopted, which at least shows some level of responsibility in ensuring she goes to a family rather than just being abandoned somewhere. He doesn't leave her in a dumpster or on another doorstep. He goes through official channels to place her with a family who presumably actually wants to raise a child. But even this seemingly responsible action is tainted by his motivations. He's not giving her up because he genuinely believes adoption is in her best interest. He's giving her up because she's inconvenient to the lifestyle he wants to maintain. After Annalee is placed with her adoptive family, Quagmire has a moment where he sees this as a terrible mistake. This suggests some level of emotional growth or realization that he's done something wrong. Maybe he misses her. Maybe he realizes he actually did bond with her during the time they had together. Maybe he's experiencing genuine regret about giving up his daughter. For a brief moment, it seems like this might be the turning point where Quagmire becomes a better person. He goes to the adoptive family's house, presumably to get Annalee back, or at least to see her. When he arrives, he sees something that makes him pause. Annalee appears happy with her new family. She's being cared for by people who actually want to raise her, who aren't going to give her up the moment she becomes inconvenient. She's in a stable home with parents who chose to adopt her, knowing full well what they were getting into. In this moment, Quagmire has to make another choice. He could disrupt Annalee's life by taking her back, or he could leave her in a situation where she's clearly thriving. For once in his life, Quagmire makes a decision that seems to prioritize someone else's well-being over his own wants. He sees that Annalee is happy and decides to leave her with the adoptive family. This could be interpreted as a rare moment of selflessness from Quagmire, a recognition that Annalee is better off without him. But then he opens his mouth and destroys any possibility of this being a genuinely noble gesture. The episode specifically states that when Quagmire sees Annalee happy with her adoptive family, he happily notes he may bump into her in 18 years, as he is still his old self. Let's break down how deeply disturbing this comment is. Quagmire is looking at his infant daughter and already thinking about potentially having a sexual encounter with her when she turns 18. He's not thinking, I hope she has a good life. He's not thinking, I hope her adoptive parents give her everything I couldn't. He's thinking about the possibility of meeting her as an adult and not recognizing each other, which could lead to a sexual situation. This single comment reveals that Quagmire learned absolutely nothing from the experience of having a daughter. The phrase, as he is still his old self, explicitly confirms that he hasn't changed. He hasn't grown. He hasn't developed any sense of paternal instinct or responsibility that would make the idea of accidentally sleeping with his own daughter horrifying to him. Instead, he's treating it like a funny hypothetical, a potential future story he could tell at the bar. Hey, remember when I almost hooked up with my own daughter because I gave her up for adoption as a baby and didn't recognize her? The implications here are staggering. Quagmire is acknowledging that he has a daughter out there somewhere who he won't recognize, and instead of seeing this as a reason to be more careful about who he sleeps with or to maybe try to maintain some kind of relationship with her so this situation could never happen, he's treating it like an amusing possibility. He's accepting that he might commit accidental incest and seems completely unbothered by the prospect. This episode also raises questions about how many other children Quagmire might have out there. If Anna Lee's mother felt the need to leave her in a basket on his doorstep, that suggests she either couldn't reach him through normal means or knew he wouldn't step up if asked directly. How many other women has Quagmire gotten pregnant over the years? How many other children exist who don't know their father because Quagmire treated their conception as just another forgettable sexual encounter? The fact that Quagmire doesn't even consider trying to be a part-time father or maintaining any relationship with Anna Lee is particularly telling. He doesn't ask the adoptive family if he can have visitation rights or stay in touch as she grows up. He doesn't want updates on her life or photos to see how she's doing. He just walks away completely, erasing her from his life as thoroughly as possible so he can go back to his pre-Anna Lee existence. The only reason he even thinks about her future is to make a creepy joke about potentially sleeping with her. The episode presents this whole situation as somewhat lighthearted, wrapping serious issues of parental abandonment and potential incest in Family Guy's signature dark humor. But when you strip away the jokes and actually look at what Quagmire did, it's genuinely disturbing. He found out he had a daughter, tried parenting for what couldn't have been more than a few weeks, gave her up because she interfered with his sex life, briefly regretted it, then decided to leave her with her adoptive family while making a comment suggesting he might accidentally commit incest with her in the future. There's no real consequence for Quagmire's actions in this episode. He doesn't face social judgment from his friends for giving up his daughter. He doesn't seem to experience any lasting emotional trauma or regret. He doesn't change his behavior to prevent this situation from happening again. Anna Lee just disappears from his life and from the show, presumably growing up somewhere in the Family Guy universe with no idea that her biological father is a sex-obsessed pilot who lives in Quahog and gave her up because she cried too much during his hookups. The adoptive family probably has no idea about Quagmire's comment or his character. They likely think they're saving a baby from a difficult situation, giving her a loving home that her biological parents couldn't provide. They don't know that the father specifically gave her up because she was inconvenient to his sex life, or that he's already making disturbing jokes about potentially meeting her when she's 18. Anna Lee will probably grow up thinking her biological parents gave her up for noble reasons, wanting her to have a better life, never knowing that her father's motivation was entirely selfish and that he learned nothing from the experience. This episode represents Quagmire at his most fundamentally selfish. He had an opportunity to grow as a person, to develop some sense of responsibility, and put someone else's needs first. Instead, he tried parenting on like it was a new hobby, decided it wasn't for him when it required actual sacrifice, and bailed on his daughter without a second thought beyond a creepy comment about potentially sleeping with her in the future. That's not just going too far. That's revealing a level of self-centeredness that borders on sociopathic. Most people would be horrified by the idea of giving up their child because the child's crying interfered with their sex life. Quagmire did it and then moved on with his day like nothing happened, completely unchanged by an experience that should have fundamentally altered how he sees himself and his place in the world. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Quagmire's Dad, Season 8, Episode 18. Quagmire violently beats Brian nearly to death after Brian unknowingly sleeps with Ida. Finding out your friend slept with your parent is one of those situations that would test anyone's ability to stay calm and rational. Most people would be angry, disgusted, maybe throw a few insults, definitely damage the friendship for a while. But Quagmire apparently decided that the appropriate response to this situation was to beat Brian so severely that he left him badly injured, which is the kind of reaction that crosses from understandable anger into assault and battery territory. The fact that Brian didn't even know he was sleeping with Quagmire's father makes the whole thing even more unhinged, because Quagmire is essentially punishing someone for accidentally stumbling into a situation they had no way of anticipating or preventing. The whole situation starts when Quagmire's father, Lieutenant Dan Quagmire, comes to visit him at his home. Joe and Peter show up and get quickly introduced to Dan, who immediately turns them off with boring stories. The two friends start texting each other on their cell phones, mutually implying that Quagmire's father is homosexual. This is already awkward territory because Peter and Joe are making assumptions about someone's sexuality based on stereotypes, but they're doing it behind his back through text messages rather than having an actual conversation. Peter and Joe's suspicions about Dan's sexuality lead to Quagmire deciding to confront them about their behavior. To prove them wrong and defend his father's masculinity, Quagmire invites Peter and Lois to the naval ball as guests of his father. This backfires spectacularly when Peter and Quagmire begin arguing at the ball, with Quagmire insisting that Peter is just jealous because his dad is a drunk while Quagmire's father is a hero. It's the kind of argument that reveals how defensive Quagmire is about his father's reputation and how much he values the image of having a traditionally masculine military father. Later that night at the naval ball, Quagmire gets bombarded by comments from fellow sailors about his father's sexuality. These aren't just Peter and Joe making private jokes anymore. Multiple people at this military event are making comments, which suggests that whatever Dan Quagmire's situation is, it's noticeable enough that other people have picked up on it too. Quagmire decides he needs to confront his father directly about these comments and rumors. When Quagmire confronts Dan, he discovers something that completely changes his understanding of his father. Dan reveals that he is actually a woman trapped in a man's body and desires a sex change operation. This is 2010 terminology for what we would now more commonly describe as a trans woman. Dan has been living as a man his entire life, raised Quagmire as a father, served in the military, but has always felt that his gender identity didn't match his assigned sex at birth. This revelation fundamentally challenges everything Quagmire thought he knew about his father. The next day, Quagmire asks Peter and Lois for advice on how to handle this situation. Lois suggests that Peter go along with Quagmire to support him during his father's operation. During the surgery, Quagmire is worried about the outcome. When the surgery is announced as a success, Dan Quagmire emerges as an attractive blonde woman who now goes by the name Ida. The episode specifically describes her as attractive, which becomes relevant later when Brian meets her without knowing who she is. Peter and Lois invite Quagmire and his new friend Ida to dinner that night. During dinner, Peter starts asking Ida questions about the surgery, which makes Lois embarrassed by Peter's lack of social grace. Ida reveals that she has no problems discussing the procedure openly. She's comfortable talking about her transition and answering questions. But this openness frustrates Quagmire, who clearly isn't ready to have these conversations or accept this new reality about his parent. He becomes frustrated enough that he returns home early, unable to deal with the situation. Ida decides to confront Quagmire back at his house to discuss their newly altered relationship. They have a conversation about how things will be different now, about how Ida is still the same person who raised Quagmire, but now living authentically as the woman she always felt she was. Despite this conversation and Ida's attempts to maintain their relationship, Quagmire rejects his father. He can't or won't accept Ida's transition. This rejection sets up the emotional backdrop for what happens later in the episode. Meanwhile, Brian announces he's leaving for a few days to attend a seminar in New Haven about creating his own web series. This completely separate subplot is what eventually collides with the Quagmire family drama in the most unfortunate way possible. When Brian returns to Quahog later that week, he decides to stop at the bar on his way home. While there, he comes across Ida, Quagmire's father, who has now transitioned to living as a woman. Brian and Ida quickly bond at the bar. They talk, they connect, they enjoy each other's company. Brian has no idea who Ida is. He doesn't know she's Quagmire's father. He doesn't know she recently had sex reassignment surgery. He just sees an attractive woman at a bar who he's having good conversation with. From Brian's perspective, this is just a normal potential romantic connection with someone new. Ida, on her end, is probably enjoying being seen and treated as a woman by someone who doesn't know her history or have any preconceived notions about her transition. The two decide to go back to Ida's hotel room together. They kiss and have sex. For Brian, this is just a successful night out that led to a connection with someone. For Ida, this might be a validating experience of being desired as the woman she is. Neither of them is doing anything wrong or deceptive in this moment. They're two adults who met at a bar and decided to spend the night together. The problem is that Brian has no idea about the connection between Ida and Quagmire. The next morning, Brian is excited about this new relationship. He shares his newfound love with Peter and Lois, talking about how great his date was and how much he likes this woman he met. To show them who he's talking about, he pulls out his cell phone to display a picture he took of Ida. Peter and Lois immediately start laughing uncontrollably. Brian, confused by their reaction, suggests that they're both jealous because he found a real woman. This comment makes them laugh even harder, which Brian interprets as them being dismissive of his relationship rather than them recognizing who Ida actually is. Frustrated by Peter and Lois's reaction, Brian goes upstairs to cool off. He starts talking with Stewie about Dan Quagmire's sex change, presumably because Stewie mentions something about Quagmire's father's recent transition. During this conversation, Brian asks questions about sexual relationships with transgender individuals. While they're talking, Brian learns that Quagmire's father's new identity is actually Ida, the same woman he met at the bar and spent the night with. The realization hits him all at once. He just slept with his friend's father. Brian's reaction is to begin vomiting profusely. He's not disgusted because Ida is trans. The episode makes it clear through dialogue that Brian's reaction is specifically about the fact that he slept with Quagmire's father, not about Ida's gender identity. It's the family connection that horrifies him, the accidental crossing of a major social boundary. Brian has been friends with Quagmire for years, and he just unknowingly slept with Quagmire's parent. That's the kind of revelation that would make anyone's stomach turn. While Brian is processing this information and having his visceral reaction, Ida returns to Quagmire's house. She decides to apologize to her son for their earlier conflict. Quagmire returns the apology as well, suggesting that they're making progress toward reconciliation. Ida then announces that she found a new boyfriend, which is actually positive news, suggesting she's moving forward with her life and being accepted as a woman by potential partners. Quagmire asks what his name is. Ida reveals that it's Brian. The moment Quagmire hears Brian's name, everything changes. His friend, someone he's known for years, someone who lives right in his neighborhood, slept with his father. Quagmire doesn't stop to consider that Brian had no way of knowing who Ida was. He doesn't think about the fact that this was a chance meeting at a bar where neither party was being deceptive. He doesn't consider that Ida is an adult who can make her own choices about who she dates or sleeps with. All Quagmire processes is, Brian slept with my dad. Quagmire rushes to the Griffin family household. He doesn't call Brian. He doesn't send a text asking to talk. He doesn't take even a moment to cool down or think rationally about the situation. He just immediately goes to the Griffin house in what's clearly a rage. When he gets there, he beats Brian senseless. The episode specifically states that he leaves Brian badly injured, which indicates this wasn't just a few punches thrown in anger. This was a sustained assault that caused significant harm. Let's break down what actually happened here from an objective standpoint. Brian went to a bar, met an attractive woman who was openly socializing and looking to connect with people, had a consensual interaction with that woman, and only later discovered she had a connection to Quagmire. At no point did Brian do anything wrong. He didn't pursue Ida knowing she was Quagmire's father. He didn't deceive anyone. He didn't manipulate the situation. He was just a single guy who met someone at a bar and made a connection. Ida also did nothing wrong. She's an adult woman who went to a bar, met someone, and chose to spend time with them. She wasn't obligated to introduce herself by saying, "Hi, I'm Ida. I used to be Dan Quagmire, Glenn Quagmire's father, and I recently transitioned." That's not information you lead with when meeting someone new. She was just living her life, trying to move forward after her transition and after her son rejected her, and she met someone who saw her as a woman and treated her with interest and respect. But Quagmire doesn't see any of this nuance. He doesn't care that Brian didn't know. He doesn't consider that this was an accident. He doesn't think about how Ida might feel having her romantic life policed by her adult son. He just knows that his friend slept with his parent, and his response is immediate violence. The fact that he beat Brian badly enough to leave him badly injured suggests this went beyond a few angry punches. This was Quagmire completely losing control and potentially causing serious harm. What makes this even more unreasonable is that Quagmire himself had rejected Ida. He couldn't accept his father's transition and had ended their relationship. Then, when Ida finds acceptance and connection with someone else, Quagmire suddenly cares enough to commit assault over it. He wanted nothing to do with Ida as his parent, but he also can't handle the idea of his friend being romantically involved with her. It's a completely contradictory position that reveals Quagmire isn't thinking rationally about any of this. Brian gets the final word in this confrontation. While he's badly injured from the beating, he tells Quagmire about having sex with his dad and shuts the door. This response shows that despite being beaten up, Brian isn't backing down or apologizing for something he doesn't think he did wrong. He's essentially saying, "Yes, I slept with your dad, and there's nothing you can do about it now except assault me," which you already did. It's a defiant response from someone who just got attacked. The episode doesn't show any legal consequences for Quagmire's assault on Brian. In the real world, what Quagmire did would result in assault charges, possibly a restraining order, definitely criminal prosecution if Brian decided to press charges. But in the Family Guy universe, Quagmire just beats Brian badly enough to cause significant injury and faces no consequences beyond Brian's verbal response. There's no arrest, no court case, no restraining order. Just Quagmire being allowed to commit violent assault because his friend accidentally slept with his father. This episode represents Quagmire going too far in multiple ways. First, his initial rejection of Ida shows an inability to accept his parents' authentic identity, which is its own form of harm. But the violence against Brian is where Quagmire crosses from personal emotional issues into criminal behavior. He takes a situation that was an innocent accident and responds with disproportionate violence that could have caused permanent injury or even death, depending on the severity of the beating. The long-term implications of Quagmire's actions extend beyond just the immediate violence. Brian now has to live next door to someone who viciously assaulted him. There's no indication that their friendship recovers from this or that Quagmire ever apologizes for the attack. The neighborhood just continues functioning with Quagmire, having established through violence that crossing certain lines, even accidentally, will result in serious physical harm. It's the kind of precedent that should fundamentally alter how everyone relates to Quagmire, but the show just moves on like it's another Tuesday in Quahog. Quagmire's inability to separate his complicated feelings about his father's transition from Brian's accidental involvement shows a fundamental lack of emotional maturity. A more reasonable person would be upset, maybe yell at Brian, definitely feel disgusted by the situation, but would also recognize that Brian genuinely didn't know and that Ida is an adult who can make her own choices. Instead, Quagmire chooses violence as his first and only response, showing that even when he's dealing with complex family issues and legitimate emotional pain, his default setting is still aggression and a complete disregard for consequences or other people's perspectives. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, Season 10, Episode 3, Quagmire Plans and Commits Murder. Most people who discover their sister is in an abusive relationship would call the police, help her find a safe place to stay, connect her with domestic violence resources, or stage an intervention to convince her to leave. These are the normal, legal, socially acceptable responses to domestic abuse. Quagmire apparently looked at all those options and decided the most reasonable solution was premeditated murder. He didn't just kill someone in a moment of passion or self-defense. He planned it, recruited his friends to help, lured the victim into the woods under false pretenses, and then literally ran him down with a car and crushed him against a tree. That's not vigilante justice. That's first-degree murder with accomplices. The whole situation starts when Peter and Joe return from a fishing trip where Quagmire was suspiciously absent. They check on him and discover he tried to hang himself during autoerotic asphyxiation, which is already a concerning start to any episode. While Quagmire is recovering from his accident at the hospital, his sister Brenda shows up with her boyfriend Jeff. The episode immediately establishes that Jeff is abusive. While Quagmire is unconscious, Brenda sings him a childhood nursery rhyme to help him recover, which causes him to wake up. Despite Jeff's complaints about the situation, Brenda agrees to take care of Glenn while he recovers from his injuries. This means Jeff and Brenda are staying at Quagmire's house or nearby, which gives everyone in the neighborhood a front row seat to Jeff's abusive behavior. The entire neighborhood is kept awake by Jeff's rants, which shows that his abuse isn't private or hidden. He's openly aggressive and loud enough that everyone around can hear what's happening. Lois decides to intervene by taking Brenda out to a restaurant for a day away from Jeff. During this outing, Lois notices something suspicious. Brenda continues to wear sunglasses inside the restaurant, which is a classic red flag for domestic violence victims trying to hide injuries. When Lois investigates, she discovers that Jeff gave Brenda a black eye. This isn't just emotional abuse or verbal aggression. Jeff is physically beating Quagmire's sister badly enough to leave visible marks that she feels the need to hide. Brenda's response to Lois discovering the black eye is to try to justify Jeff's treatment. This is heartbreakingly common behavior from domestic abuse victims. They make excuses for their abuser, minimize the violence, convince themselves that they somehow deserved it or that it won't happen again. Lois is disgusted by Brenda's attempts to justify Jeff's behavior, but she can't force Brenda to leave. That's the terrible reality of domestic violence situations. The victim has to choose to leave, and many victims are too emotionally manipulated, financially dependent, or genuinely afraid to make that choice. At the Drunken Clam, the guys discuss Jeff and Brenda's situation. Quagmire expresses a very real and legitimate worry that some night Jeff may actually kill Brenda. This is not an exaggeration. Domestic violence escalates over time, and abusers who are already hitting their partners hard enough to cause black eyes are absolutely capable of eventually committing murder. Joe, speaking from his position as a police officer, claims he can't act until after the fact. This reflects the real-world frustration with how domestic violence cases are handled. Police often can't intervene meaningfully until after serious harm has occurred. Joe suggests they try an intervention instead. The intervention scene shows exactly how difficult it is to help someone in an abusive relationship. Most of the intervention goes badly. Meg suggests that Brenda should try to change Jeff, which is a naive and dangerous suggestion that puts the responsibility on the victim to fix her abuser. Chris gets mad at Joe for calling him the wrong name, which derails the entire conversation. Peter changes the topic to smoking cigarettes because Peter has the attention span of a goldfish. But Glenn makes a heartfelt plea to his sister, really trying to reach her emotionally and convince her to leave Jeff. For a moment, it seems like Glenn has won Brenda over. She appears to be considering leaving Jeff, which would be the ideal outcome. But then Jeff walks into the room and everything changes. When Glenn tries to show Jeff the door, essentially telling him to leave the intervention and give them space to talk to Brenda, Jeff drops a bomb. He has Brenda announce that they're getting married because she's pregnant. This traps Brenda even further in the relationship. Now she's not just dealing with an abusive boyfriend. She's carrying his child and about to legally bind herself to him through marriage. Later that night, Glenn is playing cards with Peter and Joe, and he continues to worry about Jeff's treatment of Brenda. This is the moment when things take a dark turn. Peter comments that he wishes they could just beat Jeff up. It's the kind of throwaway comment that in a normal situation would just be venting frustration, expressing a fantasy about being able to physically confront an abuser without legal consequences. But Glenn jumps on the suggestion immediately and escalates it beyond anything Peter intended. Glenn doesn't just agree they should beat Jeff up, he recommends they kill him. Joe, as the police officer in the group, tries to put the brakes on this plot. He knows this is crossing from angry talk into actual criminal conspiracy. But just as Joe is trying to talk them down from murder, they all witness Jeff ranting and striking Brenda. They see the abuse happening in real time. They watch Jeff physically assault Quagmire's pregnant sister. In that moment, Joe's resistance crumbles. All three of them agree to waste him, which is slang for murder. They're not talking about calling the police anymore. They're not discussing how to help Brenda escape. They're planning to kill Jeff. The guys go over to Quagmire's house with a plan. They invite Jeff on a midnight hunting trip, which is already suspicious because why would Quagmire invite someone he openly hates on a hunting trip? Jeff even points this out when they're in the woods. He's surprised that Quagmire would invite him since he knows Quagmire hates his guts. This shows that Jeff is at least somewhat aware of the situation and should be questioning why he's out in the woods in the middle of the night with three men who have every reason to want him gone. While they're in the woods, Peter nearly slips and reveals their actual plan. Jeff goes off to take a whiz, giving Quagmire the opportunity to make his move. Quagmire picks up his gun and says he's determined to just shoot Jeff when he returns. This is premeditated murder. Quagmire has made a conscious decision to shoot an unarmed man in the back while he's urinating in the woods. There's no self-defense claim here. There's no heat of passion. It's cold-blooded assassination. But Jeff is smarter or more paranoid than they gave him credit for. He slips up from behind and points his gun at Quagmire's head. Jeff has figured out that they brought him out here to kill him, and now he has the upper hand. After ranting at Glenn about how he knew something was wrong, Jeff smacks Quagmire to the ground. Joe reaches for his shotgun, trying to help his friend, but Jeff threatens to shoot Quagmire in the back of the head if Joe makes any moves. Joe, thinking quickly and trying to de-escalate, suggests they all put their weapons down. Jeff complies, which shows he's at least willing to negotiate rather than just kill them all immediately. Jeff asks if they'll follow through on Joe's promise to forget the entire thing and move on. Peter and Joe agree because they're trying to stay alive and get out of this situation. But Quagmire refuses to let it go, even with a gun pointed at him. Even after Jeff has shown willingness to stand down, Quagmire won't back off from his mission to remove Jeff from Brenda's life. Quagmire's refusal to let it go leads to Jeff knocking Peter and Joe unconscious with the butt of his shotgun. Now it's just Jeff and Quagmire, and Jeff takes Peter's car with Glenn, driving deeper into the woods with the clear intention of killing Quagmire. Jeff has gone from defending himself against a murder plot to actively planning to commit murder himself. The situation has spiraled completely out of control, and both men are now trying to kill each other. Glenn challenges Jeff's manhood, which is a classic manipulation tactic. He's essentially daring Jeff to fight him with fists instead of just shooting him. Jeff agrees readily to do the job with his fists, which shows he's confident in his ability to beat Quagmire in a physical fight. And he's right to be confident. Jeff beats Glenn senseless, giving him the kind of beating that would leave someone seriously injured or potentially dead. Then Jeff proceeds to strangle Quagmire until he collapses. This is where things get darkly comedic in the way only Family Guy can manage. Jeff thinks Quagmire is dead or dying. He grabs a shovel to bury the body, which shows he's committed to this murder and covering it up. But the car's headlights illuminate Jeff, and he turns to see that Glenn is still alive. Jeff is surprised, asking how Quagmire survived being strangled. Glenn shouts that he strangles himself every day, referencing his autoerotic asphyxiation habit from earlier in the episode. This means Quagmire's bizarre sexual practices have literally built up his tolerance to strangulation, enough to survive a murder attempt. While Jeff is processing this information, Quagmire makes his move. He runs to Peter's car and drives it directly at Jeff, crushing him against a tree. This is vehicular homicide. Quagmire uses the car as a weapon to kill Jeff, running him down with enough force to crush him against a tree, which would cause massive internal injuries, broken bones, and almost certainly death. It's brutal, violent, and completely intentional. Quagmire set out to kill Jeff, survived Jeff's attempt to kill him first, and then successfully committed the murder he originally planned. When the guys arrive back at the house the next morning, they find Brenda in tears over Jeff's failure to return. She's worried about her abusive boyfriend who beats her and gave her a black eye, which shows how deep the psychological manipulation goes in abusive relationships. Even after everything Jeff has done to her, Brenda still cares about him and is distraught at his absence. The guys don't tell her the truth. They don't say, "Jeff tried to kill your brother, so your brother killed him first." Instead, they give her a fake note they created, explaining that Jeff thought it would be best if he left. This fake note is a cover-up for murder. They're lying to Brenda about what happened to her boyfriend, denying her the right to know the truth about his death, and forcing her to believe he abandoned her when she's pregnant with his child. Brenda breaks down in tears over Jeff, mourning the loss of her abusive boyfriend and the father of her unborn child. Peter, being Peter, notes that he wishes he could kill someone else and gets an idea about Mort Goldman, which is a disturbing suggestion that he's now comfortable with murder as a solution to problems. The episode glosses over the fact that Quagmire, Peter, and Joe committed conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, actual murder, and then covered it up by destroying evidence and lying to the victim's partner. In the real world, all three of them would be facing serious felony charges. Quagmire would be charged with first-degree murder because the killing was premeditated. They lured Jeff into the woods specifically to kill him. Peter and Joe would be charged as accomplices because they actively participated in the plan, even if Joe had second thoughts. Joe, as a police officer, has committed an especially egregious crime. He used his knowledge and authority as law enforcement to participate in a vigilante killing. He didn't arrest Jeff for domestic violence. He didn't help Brenda file a restraining order or press charges. He didn't use any of the legal tools available to him as a cop. Instead, he joined a murder conspiracy. This is the kind of thing that would end his career, land him in prison, and destroy the credibility of the entire police force. The moral complexity of this situation is what makes it particularly interesting from an ethical standpoint. Jeff was objectively a bad person. He physically abused Brenda, gave her a black eye, was controlling and verbally abusive, and represented a genuine threat to her safety. The fear that he might eventually kill her was not unfounded. Domestic violence frequently escalates to murder. In that sense, removing Jeff from the situation did protect Brenda from future harm. But the decision to murder Jeff wasn't made through any legitimate process. They didn't exhaust legal options. They didn't help Brenda develop a safety plan or connect her with domestic violence resources. They didn't give Jeff any opportunity to face legal consequences for his actions through the justice system. They just decided that death was the appropriate punishment for domestic abuse and carried out that sentence themselves. That's vigilante justice, and it's illegal for very good reasons. The long-term consequences for Brenda are particularly tragic. She's pregnant with Jeff's child and will now raise that child alone, believing that Jeff abandoned them rather than knowing he was killed. She'll never get closure about what happened. She'll never know that her brother murdered her boyfriend. She might spend years wondering if Jeff will come back, living with uncertainty about his disappearance. The guys think they helped her, but they've actually created a situation where Brenda will carry trauma and confusion about Jeff's disappearance for the rest of her life. For Quagmire, this episode represents going too far in the most literal sense possible. He took a legitimate concern about his sister's safety and responded with premeditated murder. He involved his friends in a criminal conspiracy. He used a vehicle as a weapon to crush someone to death. He covered up the crime and lied to his sister about what happened. And then, according to Peter's comment at the end, They're apparently considering doing it again to Mort Goldman, which suggests they've learned nothing about why vigilante murder is problematic. The episode presents this as a somewhat justified killing because Jeff was an abuser, but that justification doesn't hold up under any kind of ethical or legal scrutiny. Quagmire didn't kill Jeff in self-defense during the moment when Jeff was actually trying to kill him. He killed Jeff after Jeff had already beaten him and walked away to get a shovel. At that point, Quagmire could have escaped, called the police, or done anything other than commit murder. Instead, he chose to run Jeff down with a car, which is about as premeditated as you can get in a split-second decision. This episode shows that when Quagmire goes too far, he doesn't just cross lines, he obliterates them entirely, faces no real consequences, and apparently considers doing it again. That's not just poor judgment or a momentary lapse. That's a fundamental disregard for human life and legal boundaries that should make everyone in Quahog reconsider whether they want to live next door to someone who has proven himself capable of cold-blooded murder. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Meg and Quagmire. Season 10, Episode 10. Quagmire aggressively pursues Meg the moment she turns 18, invites her to his sex cabin, and tries to sleep with her. Watching your daughter grow up comes with many parental milestones. First day of school, learning to drive, high school graduation. Most parents mark these occasions with pride and maybe some tears. But apparently for Quagmire, the milestone he was waiting for was the exact moment Meg Griffin becomes legal, which he celebrated by immediately making his intentions to seduce her crystal clear at her 18th birthday party. This isn't a case of two people meeting as adults and developing a connection. This is a middle-aged man who has known Meg since she was a literal child, waiting with the patience of a predator for the calendar to flip to a date where he could pursue her without technically breaking statutory rape laws. The whole situation starts when the Griffin family plans a surprise party for Meg's 18th birthday. This should be a happy occasion, a celebration of Meg becoming an adult surrounded by friends and family who care about her. Instead, when they throw the surprise party, only one person shows up. That person is Quagmire, not Meg's friends from school, not other family members, just Quagmire, the middle-aged neighbor who has spent years living next door to the Griffins and watching Meg grow up from childhood to adolescence to young adulthood. The episode specifically states that Quagmire's intentions to seduce Meg become quite clear at this birthday party. He's not there to celebrate Meg's milestone as a family, friend, or neighbor. He's not there to give her a nice gift and wish her well as she enters adulthood. He's there because she just turned 18, which means she's now legal, and he's ready to make his move. The fact that his intentions are clear enough for everyone at the party to notice shows that Quagmire isn't even trying to hide what he's doing. He's openly signaling that he views Meg's 18th birthday as the starting gun for his pursuit. When Quagmire leaves the party without incident, Peter lets it pass. This is Peter's first mistake, but it's an understandable one. Maybe Peter thinks Quagmire just showed up to be neighborly, and those intentions weren't as serious as they seemed. Maybe Peter doesn't want to make a scene at Meg's birthday party. Maybe he's hoping that Quagmire will have enough sense to back off on his own. Whatever Peter's reasoning, he doesn't confront Quagmire at the party or make it clear that pursuing Meg is absolutely off limits. Quagmire takes Peter's silence as permission to continue. He starts flirting with Meg, which is already problematic because there's a massive age gap and power imbalance between a middle-aged man and a teenager who just turned 18. Meg is barely an adult. She's still living at home with her parents. She's probably still in high school or just graduated. She has virtually no life experience, especially compared to Quagmire, who is old enough to be her father. But Quagmire doesn't care about any of that. He talks Meg into going out with him, convincing her to agree to a date. When Quagmire shows up for their date, Peter finally objects. This is Peter trying to do the right thing, recognizing that his middle-aged neighbor dating his barely legal daughter is wrong on multiple levels. But Lois allows Meg to go out with Quagmire anyway. She tells Peter that it's just a ploy for attention and that Meg will rebel if they try to stop her. Lois references her own past, explaining that she rebelled against her father Carter when he tried to control her relationships. She thinks that by allowing this to happen, Meg will realize on her own that Quagmire isn't right for her, and the whole thing will fizzle out naturally. This is a massive miscalculation on Lois's part. She's treating this situation like Meg is dating some age-appropriate boy that her parents disapprove of for superficial reasons. But this isn't about a boyfriend with long hair or a motorcycle. This is about a middle-aged sexual predator who has known Meg since childhood and waited specifically for her 18th birthday to make his move. The psychology is completely different, and Lois's strategy of let her rebel so she gets it out of her system doesn't apply to this situation. After their date, the episode states that Glenn fails to score, but considers it just a temporary setback. This phrasing reveals everything about how Quagmire views this situation. He's not thinking about getting to know Meg as a person or building a genuine relationship. He's thinking about scoring, which is treating sex like a goal to achieve and Meg like an objective to conquer. The fact that he considers not having sex on the first date just a temporary setback shows he has no intention of giving up. He's planning to keep pursuing her until he gets what he wants. When Quagmire arrives home after the date, he finds Peter waiting for him. Peter has realized that Lois was wrong and that he needs to intervene directly. Peter orders Quagmire to stay away from Meg, which is exactly what any reasonable father would do in this situation. But Quagmire's response reveals the full extent of his predatory mindset. He points out that Meg is 18, legal, and ripe for the picking. That phrase, ripe for the picking, is particularly disturbing because it compares Meg to fruit that has just reached the right level of ripeness for harvest. It dehumanizes her, treating her like an object that exists for Quagmire's consumption, rather than a human being with her own thoughts, feelings, and agency. The fact that Quagmire uses the word legal as his primary justification shows he understands that what he's doing is morally questionable. He's not saying Meg and I have a genuine connection, or she's mature for her age, or any of the other things someone might say if they genuinely believed they were pursuing an appropriate relationship. He's saying she's legal, which means he can't be arrested for it. That's the bar he's setting. Not is this right? Not is this healthy? Just, can I technically do this without going to jail? Peter vows to stop Quagmire, which sets up the conflict for the rest of the episode. The episode explicitly states that Quagmire continues his attempts to get into Meg's pants while Peter manages to keep them separated. This phrasing is important because it reveals that Quagmire's goal is specifically sexual. He's not trying to date Meg in the sense of taking her to movies and getting to know her over coffee. He's trying to get into her pants, which is crude language that makes his objectives crystal clear. He wants sex with barely legal Meg, and Peter is physically keeping them apart to prevent that from happening. Peter tries to talk some sense into Meg, which is what he should have done from the beginning. He attempts to explain to her why this relationship with Quagmire is a terrible idea. But Meg complains to Lois, who tells Peter again not to push Meg or she'll rebel. Lois is still operating under her original theory that letting Meg make her own mistakes is the best approach. She hasn't yet realized that some mistakes are too dangerous to let your children make on their own. Lois changes her tune dramatically when she finds out that Meg and Quagmire went off to his sex cabin to be alone. The episode specifically describes it as his sex cabin, which tells you everything you need to know about what kind of place this is and what Quagmire uses it for. This isn't a nice family cabin where people go to fish and enjoy nature. This is a location Quagmire specifically maintains for sexual encounters, probably filled with all kinds of disturbing equipment and designed entirely for the purpose of seduction and sex. The realization that Meg is at Quagmire's sex cabin makes Lois finally understand the danger. She and Peter set off immediately to stop them. Lois admits that Peter was right not to allow Quagmire to have a free shot with Meg. This is Lois acknowledging that her strategy of letting Meg rebel was wrong and that Peter's instinct to protect their daughter was correct. Some situations require parental intervention, and this is absolutely one of them. When Lois and Peter arrive at the sex cabin, they find Meg and Quagmire in their underwear. This means they interrupted the situation right before it would have gone further. If Peter and Lois had arrived even a few minutes later, Quagmire would have achieved his goal of having sex with Meg. The fact that they're already down to their underwear shows how close Quagmire came to successfully manipulating a barely legal teenager into having sex with him at his specifically designated sex cabin. Peter immediately orders Meg to the car. He's not asking, he's not suggesting, he's telling her as her father that she needs to leave right now. Meg tries to stand up to Peter, pointing out that she's 18. She thinks being legally an adult means she gets to make all her own choices without parental input. This is a common mindset for people who just turned 18. They think the calendar flipping to their 18th birthday means they're suddenly fully mature and capable of making all decisions without guidance. But Peter delivers a line that cuts through all of that. He states that he is still Meg's father, no matter what age she is, and puts his foot down. This is Peter exercising parental authority, not because Meg is a minor who legally has to obey him, but because he's her father who loves her and can see that she's about to make a terrible mistake with long-term consequences. Being 18 doesn't mean you suddenly have perfect judgment. It just means you're legally responsible for the consequences of your bad decisions. Peter is trying to prevent Meg from having to learn that lesson the hard way. While Peter deals with Meg, Lois confronts Quagmire. Her response is immediate and threatening. She tells him she'll cut his thing off and feed it to Brian. This is a castration threat, and it's not presented as a joke. Lois is genuinely angry enough that she's threatening to physically mutilate Quagmire for pursuing her barely legal daughter. The specific detail about feeding it to Brian adds an extra layer of humiliation to the threat. She's not just threatening to hurt him, she's threatening to hurt him in a way that would be witnessed and mocked by someone else. Lois also demands use of Quagmire's sex cabin once a month for her and Peter. This is Lois extracting a price for not following through on her castration threat. She's essentially taking something Quagmire values, his private sex cabin, and claiming partial ownership of it as compensation for him trying to sleep with her daughter. It's a way of asserting dominance and making sure Quagmire understands there are consequences for his actions beyond just being told no. The next morning, Meg thanks her parents for not allowing her to make a mistake with Glenn. This is the most important line in the entire episode because it shows that Meg herself recognizes, after having time to think about it away from Quagmire's influence, that having sex with him would have been a mistake. She's grateful that her parents intervened. She understands now that being legally 18 doesn't mean she was ready to handle a situation with a much older, much more experienced predator who had been waiting specifically for her birthday to make his move. The episode ends with Peter recalling making his own mistake sexually with an older woman when he was 18. This is Peter acknowledging that he speaks from experience. He knows what it's like to be barely 18 and to get involved with someone older who has more power and experience. He knows how those situations feel at the time versus how you view them later with perspective. He's trying to save Meg from the kind of regret he carries about his own past. What makes Quagmire's behavior in this episode particularly disturbing is the premeditation. He didn't meet Meg as an adult and develop feelings for her. He watched her grow up as his neighbor's daughter, counted down to her 18th birthday, and then immediately moved in for what he himself calls the kill in the episode title. That language of moving in for the kill treats Meg like prey, something to be hunted and captured. It reveals how Quagmire thinks about this entire situation. The age gap is also significant. Quagmire is old enough to be Meg's father. He's been an adult longer than Meg has been alive. He has decades more life experience, sexual experience, and social experience than she does. That creates a massive power imbalance that makes any relationship between them inherently problematic. Meg might be legally able to consent, but true consent requires equal footing. You can't have equal footing when one person is a sexually experienced middle-aged man and the other is a teenager who just became legal yesterday. The episode also highlights how Quagmire specifically uses the language of legality to justify his actions. He doesn't argue that his relationship with Meg is emotionally healthy or appropriate. He doesn't claim they have a special connection that transcends age. He just points out that she's legal, which is the absolute minimum requirement for his actions not to be prosecutable in court. That's not a moral argument. That's a legal technicality. Quagmire is admitting through his choice of words that he knows this is wrong, but he's going to do it anyway, because he technically can. The sex cabin detail adds another layer of predation to the whole situation. Quagmire didn't take Meg on normal dates, where they might slowly get to know each other. He took her directly to a location he specifically maintains for sexual encounters. This shows that from the very beginning, his goal was sex, not a relationship. The cabin is a tool for achieving that goal, a place where he's in complete control and where he can pressure barely legal teenagers into situations they might not agree to in more public settings. Peter's role in this episode is particularly important because it shows good parenting in action. He makes mistakes initially by not shutting down Quagmire immediately, and he maybe listens to Lois for too long when she suggests letting Meg rebel. But when he realizes the danger his daughter is in, he takes decisive action. He confronts Quagmire directly. He physically keeps them separated. He drives to the sex cabin to rescue Meg. He pulls his parental authority when necessary. He does what needs to be done to protect his daughter, even when she thinks she doesn't need protection. Lois's arc in this episode is also instructive because it shows how even well-meaning parents can make mistakes when dealing with their children's transition to adulthood. Lois thinks she's being supportive by allowing Meg to make her own choices and not being controlling like her own father was. But she learns that there's a difference between being supportive of healthy independence and standing back while your daughter walks into a dangerous situation with a predator. Sometimes love means saying no, even when your child is technically an adult. The long-term consequences of Quagmire's actions in this episode extend beyond just this one incident. He permanently damaged his relationship with the Griffin family. He revealed to everyone in his social circle that he views barely legal teenagers as acceptable targets for sexual pursuit. He showed that he's willing to pursue the children of his friends the moment they turn 18. This should fundamentally alter how everyone sees him and whether they trust him around their families. But being Family Guy, everyone probably just moves on to the next episode like nothing happened. Quagmire's behavior in this episode represents going too far because he took his general pattern of sexual predation and applied it to someone who grew up right next door. Someone he watched develop from childhood to barely legal adulthood, someone who is the daughter of people he claims as friends. He calculated exactly when she would turn 18 and made his move immediately, using manipulation and the power dynamics of age and experience to try to achieve his goal of having sex with her. The only thing that stopped him was parental intervention, arriving literally moments before he would have succeeded in his goal. That's not a character flaw or a personality quirk. That's predatory behavior that should land someone on a registry, but Quagmire faces no real consequences beyond a threat from Lois and losing access to his sex cabin a few days per month. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to The Giggity Wife, Season 11, Episode 12. Quagmire tricks Peter into faking a gay marriage so Quagmire can escape a Vegas wedding he got himself into. Most people who wake up married to someone they don't know after a drunken night would handle it like adults. They'd apologize, explain the mistake, file for an annulment, maybe feel embarrassed for a while, and move on with their lives. But Quagmire apparently looked at that straightforward solution and decided the better option was to fake being gay and nearly have sex with his best friend to trick his accidental wife into granting him a divorce. That's not just going too far. That's taking a relatively simple problem and transforming it into a situation so absurd and manipulative that it requires Peter Griffin to go on a date with another man and strip down to almost nothing before logic finally intervenes. The whole mess starts when Peter discovers that Joe has a student ID he confiscated from a kid who gave him lip. This is already questionable behavior from Joe, who as a police officer probably shouldn't be keeping students' IDs as trophies, but that's a different issue entirely. Peter sees this student ID as an opportunity. He convinces Joe and Quagmire to visit the Harvard University campus with him, to use the ID for getting into places they don't belong, specifically to have lunch and enjoy campus facilities they're not entitled to access. What starts as Peter's scheme to use a fake student ID for free, Harvard dining hall food turns into a wild night on the town. The three of them end up getting extremely drunk, which is par for the course for this group. They've had plenty of nights out drinking before without major consequences, beyond hangovers, and maybe some property damage. But this particular night of drinking leads to something much worse. A drunken Quagmire accidentally marries a prostitute named Charmise. The word accidentally is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. You don't accidentally marry someone the way you accidentally order the wrong coffee. There's paperwork involved. There are vows. There's some kind of officiant who has to be present. Even in Las Vegas, which is famous for making marriage easy, you still have to actively participate in the process. Quagmire was drunk enough that he either didn't understand what was happening or didn't care in the moment, but he was conscious and participating enough to actually complete a legal marriage to a sex worker he presumably just met. When Quagmire sobers up and realizes what he's done, his new wife, Charmise, refuses to let go of their relationship. She's legally married to him now, and she sees this as an opportunity. From her perspective, she's gone from being a prostitute to being the wife of a commercial airline pilot with a house in a nice neighborhood. That's a significant upgrade in lifestyle and security. She's not about to walk away from that just because Quagmire claims it was all a drunken mistake. She has legal rights now as his spouse, and she intends to exercise them. Quagmire's first instinct is to pursue divorce, which is the obvious and reasonable solution. You got drunk and married someone you don't want to be married to. You file for divorce. It's embarrassing and it costs money, but it's the adult way to handle the situation. But Joe points out a problem that stops Quagmire in his tracks. In a divorce, Quagmire could lose everything. His house, his savings, his assets, everything he's worked for could be split with Charmise as part of a divorce settlement. Community property laws mean that even though they were only married for a brief time, Charmise would be entitled to a significant portion of Quagmire's wealth. This financial reality makes Quagmire reconsider the divorce option. He starts trying to make the best of the marriage, attempting to see if maybe he and Charmise could actually work as a couple. But Charmise can't pull herself far enough out of what the episode calls the gutter for Quagmire's tastes. This is Quagmire, a man whose own lifestyle and behavior is questionable at best, deciding that his accidental wife from the sex work industry isn't classy enough for him. The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife, but Quagmire apparently doesn't see it. He wants out of this marriage, but he doesn't want to lose his money and possessions in the process. When Quagmire shows reluctance to pursue their relationship seriously, Charmise questions whether he might be gay. She's trying to understand why her new husband isn't interested in being intimate with her or building a real marriage. In her mind, the most logical explanation for a man not wanting to be with a woman is that he might be attracted to men instead. She makes it clear that if Quagmire is actually gay, their marriage would be over. She's not interested in being married to a gay man, and she would grant him a divorce if that were the case. This offhand comment from Charmise gives Quagmire an idea. If Charmise will divorce him willingly if she believes he's gay, then all he has to do is convince her that he's gay. He wouldn't have to go through the courts. He wouldn't have to split his assets. He could just pretend to be attracted to men. Charmise would want out of the marriage herself, and everyone could walk away without the financial devastation of a contested divorce. It's a plan that seems simple in theory, but requires Quagmire to be convincing enough as a gay man that Charmise actually believes him. Quagmire starts his performance, trying to act gay in ways that would convince Charmise that he's not actually attracted to women. But Charmise is smarter than Quagmire gives her credit for. She catches him in the act of watching straight pornography, which immediately destroys his cover story. If Quagmire were actually gay, he wouldn't be watching heterosexual porn featuring women. He'd be watching content that matched his supposed orientation. The straight porn is proof that Quagmire is lying about being gay, and Charmise calls him out on it immediately. Faced with the exposure of his lie, Charmise gives Quagmire an ultimatum. If he wants her to believe he's actually gay, he needs to prove it by having sex with a man. Not just kissing someone at a bar or holding hands. Actual sex. She wants undeniable proof that Quagmire is genuinely attracted to men, and she's not going to accept anything less than him following through with a sexual encounter. This puts Quagmire in an impossible position. He's not actually gay, so he has no interest in having sex with a man, but that's exactly what Charmise is demanding as proof of his supposed homosexuality. Quagmire approaches Peter with this idea, which shows exactly how far he's willing to go to avoid paying for his divorce. He's asking his best friend to have sex with him so he can convince his accidental wife that he's gay, so she'll grant him a divorce without taking his money. That's an insane request to make of anyone, let alone your friend who you see regularly and who lives next door to you. Most people would never ask this of a friend. Most people wouldn't even consider it. But Quagmire is desperate enough and selfish enough to actually make this request. Peter agrees to Quagmire's request, but he has one condition. They need to have a date first. Peter isn't willing to just jump straight into pretending to have sex with Quagmire. He wants the full romantic experience first, probably because Peter doesn't really understand what's happening, or because he thinks if they're going to do this absurd thing, they might as well do it properly. This condition means Quagmire has to take Peter on an actual date, treating him the way he would treat a romantic partner, going through all the courtship rituals, and pretending to be interested in Peter as more than just a friend. The episode specifically states that Glenn suffers through this date. Quagmire is miserable during the entire experience. He has to pretend to be romantically interested in Peter, make conversation like they're on a real date, and go through all the motions of courtship with someone he has zero attraction to. It's uncomfortable and awkward, and everything Quagmire doesn't want to be doing, but he does it anyway, because the alternative is losing a significant portion of his wealth in the divorce. After the date, they go back to Quagmire's house where Charmise is waiting. She insists that they get on with the sex. She's not going to let them drag this out or find excuses to avoid it. She wants proof right now that Quagmire is actually gay, and she's going to sit there and watch to make sure it happens. The guys clumsily and reluctantly prepare for what they're about to do. They're both straight men who have no desire to have sex with each other, but they've backed themselves into this corner through Quagmire's scheme and Peter's willingness to go along with it. The episode describes them as moving toward actually consummating their act. They're not just talking about it or pretending anymore. They're actually undressed and in position to follow through with sexual contact. This is the moment where Quagmire's plan reaches its absolute peak of absurdity. He's literally seconds away from having sex with his best friend, neither of them wanting to do this, both of them doing it purely because Quagmire would rather commit this act than pay money in a divorce settlement. Just as they're about to cross that final line, Charmise calls off the entire charade. She stops them before they actually go through with it. She notes that it's obvious they are both straight men who have no attraction to each other. She can see through the performance. She recognizes that this is a desperate scheme rather than genuine sexual orientation. But instead of being angry about the deception, she actually appreciates something. She appreciates that Quagmire treated her decent during their brief marriage. Charmise grants Quagmire the divorce he wanted. She's willing to walk away without taking his money or possessions. She recognizes that their marriage was a mistake and that Quagmire is willing to do almost anything to get out of it, including going to these absurd lengths. The fact that he was willing to pretend to be gay and nearly have sex with his friend shows her how desperately he wanted out, and she decides to just let him go. It's an unexpectedly mature and kind response from someone who could have legally taken him for everything he had. After Charmise leaves, Peter and Quagmire embrace in relief. They're nearly naked at this point, having stripped down in preparation for what they thought they'd have to do. They're relieved that they didn't have to follow through, relieved that the scheme somehow worked despite being completely transparent, and relieved that this whole nightmare situation is finally over. They hug each other in celebration of not having to have sex with each other. Then Peter notices something horrifying. The camera on Quagmire's laptop is on. During this entire scene where they were nearly naked and embracing, Quagmire's laptop was recording or potentially streaming everything. Back at the Griffin home, the family watches in horror. They're seeing Peter and Quagmire, nearly naked, hugging each other in what appears to be a post-coital embrace without any of the context of what actually happened. They have no idea about Charmise, about the fake gay scheme, about any of the circumstances that led to this moment. All they see is their father and husband appearing to have just had a sexual encounter with the neighbor. The long-term consequences of this situation are significant. Peter's family now has video evidence of him in an extremely compromising position with Quagmire. They don't have the full context to understand that nothing actually happened. They just have what appears to be proof of infidelity, or at minimum, a very confusing situation involving their father. Peter will have to explain to Lois, to his children, to anyone who might have seen that video, exactly what happened and why he agreed to participate in this scheme. What makes Quagmire's behavior in this episode particularly egregious is the selfishness underlying every decision. He got drunk and accidentally married someone, which was his mistake. But instead of taking responsibility and handling it through proper legal channels, he tried to scheme his way out. When the pretending to be gay plan failed, instead of admitting defeat and just getting a regular divorce, he escalated to asking his friend to almost have sex with him. He manipulated Peter into participating in an elaborate charade that put Peter's marriage and reputation at risk, all because Quagmire didn't want to lose money in a divorce from a marriage that was his fault to begin with. Peter's willingness to go along with this scheme shows either remarkable friendship or remarkable stupidity, possibly both. He agreed to pretend to be in a romantic relationship with Quagmire, go on a date with him, strip down, and nearly have sex with him, all to help Quagmire avoid financial consequences of his own poor decisions. Most friends would draw a line well before getting naked together. Most friends would suggest Quagmire just hire a good divorce lawyer and deal with the consequences like an adult. But Peter, being Peter, went along with the entire absurd plan. The episode treats this situation as comedy, which it is in the context of Family Guy's particular brand of humor. But when you actually break down what happened, it reveals something disturbing about Quagmire's character. He values his money and possessions more than his dignity, more than his friendship with Peter, and more than basic honesty. He was willing to put Peter in an incredibly uncomfortable position, risk Peter's marriage, and nearly commit a sexual act he didn't want to commit, all to avoid the financial consequences of a mistake he made while drunk. Quagmire also showed zero consideration for how this scheme might affect Peter long-term. Even if Charmise believed they were gay and granted the divorce, Peter would then have to maintain the appearance of being gay or in a relationship with Quagmire for some period of time to make it believable. His family might question his sexuality. His friends might treat him differently. His reputation in the community could be affected. Quagmire didn't think about any of that. He just needed a male partner for his scheme and recruited Peter without considering the consequences Peter might face. The fact that it worked out in the end, with Charmise granting the divorce and Peter and Quagmire not actually having to have sex, doesn't excuse the attempt. Quagmire was fully prepared to go through with it. He was seconds away from actually having sex with Peter when Charmise stopped them. If she had been more stubborn or less perceptive, Quagmire would have crossed that line. He would have actually had sex with his straight best friend purely to avoid losing money, and that's a level of selfishness and poor judgment that goes beyond his usual character flaws. This episode represents Quagmire going too far because he took a problem that was entirely his own creation and solved it by manipulating his best friend into one of the most uncomfortable situations possible. He got drunk and married a prostitute. He refused to handle it responsibly through legal channels. He lied about being gay. He asked Peter to fake a relationship with him. He almost had actual sex with Peter. And through all of this, his only concern was protecting his money and possessions. He never considered just accepting the consequences of his actions like an adult, and he never thought about what he was asking Peter to sacrifice to bail him out of his self-created problem. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have The Unkindest Cut, Season 6, Episode 9. Quagmire's penis gets bitten off by a shark. Most people who suffer a traumatic injury would go through a period of grief and adjustment. They'd see therapists, join support groups, lean on friends and family for emotional support, and eventually find ways to adapt to their new circumstances. They'd discover that their identity isn't solely defined by one body part, and that life can still have meaning and purpose even after a devastating loss. But Quagmire apparently looked at losing his penis in a shark attack and decided that life without it wasn't worth living at all, to the point where he staged an entire ventriloquism show as cover for a suicide attempt. That's not just going too far, that's revealing that your entire sense of self-worth is so completely tied to your ability to have sex that you'd rather die than exist without it. The whole situation starts innocently enough, or at least as innocently as anything involving Joe's questionable police practices can start. Joe acquires a ski boat from police storage, which is cop speak for took something from evidence or confiscated property that probably should have been handled through proper legal channels. This is Joe treating police storage like his personal shopping mall, helping himself to a boat that likely belonged to someone who had it confiscated. But that's a separate issue about police corruption and asset forfeiture abuse. For now, the important thing is that Joe has a boat. Joe invites the guys to go skiing, which sounds like a normal, fun day out on the water. Peter, Quagmire, and presumably Cleveland all agree to join him. They're going to spend the day on the boat, do some water skiing, maybe drink some beer, enjoy the sunshine, and have the kind of bonding experience that middle-aged men convince themselves counts as meaningful friendship. It's the kind of thing they've probably done dozens of times before without incident, beyond maybe someone getting sunburned or Peter doing something stupid. But this particular ski trip goes catastrophically wrong. While they're out on the water, Quagmire's penis gets bitten off by a shark. The episode doesn't provide details about exactly how this happened. Was Quagmire swimming? Was he doing something inappropriate in the water? Did he fall off the skis and somehow expose himself to the shark? The specifics don't really matter. What matters is that a shark attack resulted in Quagmire losing his penis, which is both an incredibly rare type of injury and the exact kind of nightmare scenario that would devastate someone whose entire identity revolves around their sexual capabilities. The immediate aftermath of this injury must have been chaos. Someone had to get Quagmire out of the water while he was bleeding profusely from a shark bite to his genitals. They had to get him to shore or to medical help while he was experiencing both physical trauma and the dawning realization of what he just lost. There was probably panic, probably a lot of screaming, definitely an emergency room visit, where doctors had to explain to Quagmire that they couldn't reattach what the shark took because it's gone, somewhere in the ocean, digested by a shark, or being eaten by smaller fish. After Quagmire returns home from the hospital, his friends try to lift his spirits. This is what good friends do when someone experiences a traumatic loss. They visit, they bring food, they try to distract him with conversation or activities, they remind him that he's still valued and that life will eventually feel worth living again. Peter, Joe, Cleveland, and probably others make efforts to help Quagmire cope with what happened to him. They're trying to be supportive, to show him that losing his penis doesn't mean losing his friends or his place in their group. But all their efforts fail. The episode specifically states that the guys try to lift his spirits but fail. Nothing they do makes a difference. Quagmire remains in a deep depression that his friends cannot reach. This makes sense from a psychological perspective. For someone whose entire personality and lifestyle has revolved around sexual conquest for decades, losing the physical ability to have sex represents a complete destruction of identity. It's not just about the loss of pleasure or physical sensation, it's about losing the thing that defined who Quagmire thought he was. After some time dealing with this depression, Quagmire makes an announcement. He tells people that he has taken up an old hobby of ventriloquism. This seems like a positive development on the surface. He's engaging with an interest from his past, finding something to occupy his time and give him purpose, showing signs of moving forward with his life despite his injury. Ventriloquism is a harmless hobby that requires skill and practice. It's the kind of thing someone might pick up as a form of therapy or distraction after trauma. His friends probably see this as an encouraging sign that Quagmire is finding ways to cope. Quagmire announces that he's going to put on a ventriloquism show. He prepares an actual performance, presumably with a dummy, rehearsed material, and a venue where people can watch. This takes effort and planning. He's investing time and energy into creating this show, which makes it seem even more like a genuine step toward recovery. His friends probably plan to attend to support him, happy to see him doing something creative and engaging with the world again, instead of staying home alone in depression. But the entire ventriloquism show is only a pretense for killing himself. The word "only" is important here because it means the show has no other purpose. Quagmire isn't actually interested in performing ventriloquism. He isn't trying to entertain people or rediscover an old passion. The entire performance, all the preparation and planning, exists solely as a cover story for his suicide. He's creating an elaborate setup so he can kill himself publicly in a way that will look like an accident or at least be part of a dramatic final performance. This reveals something deeply disturbing about Quagmire's mental state. He's not just passively suicidal, lying in bed wishing he was dead. He's actively suicidal, making plans and taking concrete steps toward ending his life. But instead of just killing himself privately, he's staging an entire public event around it. This suggests he wants an audience for his death, or he wants his suicide to be part of a performance, or he thinks the ventriloquism show will somehow make his death more meaningful or less tragic. Whatever his reasoning, he's put significant thought and effort into planning how to kill himself. The guys intervene before Quagmire can follow through with his suicide plan. Somehow, they figure out what he's actually planning, either because someone notices something wrong during the show, or because they knew Quagmire well enough to recognize that this sudden interest in ventriloquism didn't make sense. They stop him from killing himself, presumably getting him off stage or preventing whatever method of suicide he had planned to use during the performance. This intervention saves Quagmire's life, but doesn't solve the underlying problem. He's still missing his penis, still unable to engage in the sexual activity that defined his entire existence, still believing that life without sex isn't worth living. After the suicide intervention, Quagmire goes back home. He's alive, but presumably still deeply depressed and struggling with the loss of his penis and the identity that went with it. Then, his dad, Ida, visits him. Ida, who used to be Dan Quagmire before transitioning to female, comes to see her son during his crisis. This is actually a touching moment of parental support. Ida knows what her son is going through and wants to help him in whatever way possible. Ida's solution to Quagmire's problem is unusual, but makes a certain kind of logic within the Family Guy universe. She gives Quagmire her old penis. This is the penis she had before her gender confirmation surgery, the one that was removed when she transitioned from male to female. Ida apparently kept her original penis after the surgery, either through specific request to the medical team or through some other arrangement. And now she's offering it to her son, who just lost his own penis to a shark attack. From Ida's perspective, this is probably an act of profound generosity. She's giving her son something incredibly personal that she no longer needs or wants. She underwent surgery to remove this penis because it didn't match her gender identity, and now that penis can serve a purpose by restoring her son's body after his traumatic injury. It's the ultimate act of parental sacrifice, giving your child a literal part of yourself to help them recover from tragedy. In a twisted way, it's beautiful. The penis is reattached through what must be incredibly complicated surgery. Doctors have to connect Ida's former penis to Quagmire's body, reattaching blood vessels, nerves, and other tissue to make the organ functional again. This is cutting-edge medical science, the kind of procedure that requires specialists and carries significant risks of rejection or complications. But the surgery is apparently successful. Quagmire now has a penis again, even if it's not technically his original one. He has his father's former penis, which is both medically impressive and psychologically complicated. However, the reattached penis comes with some issues. First, it has an unsightly mole on it. This mole is noticeable enough that it's off-putting to women. Quagmire has his sexual function back, but the cosmetic appearance of his new penis is problematic enough that potential partners are turned off by it. For someone who has spent his entire life pursuing casual sex with as many women as possible, having a penis that repels women instead of attracting them is a cruel twist. He got his functionality back, but at the cost of having visible evidence that this isn't his original equipment. The second issue is that urinating causes Quagmire extreme pain. The episode specifically states that he screams in pain as he urinates. This means that every single time Quagmire needs to use the bathroom, which is multiple times per day for any normal person, he experiences agony severe enough to make him scream. This isn't just mild discomfort or slight pain. This is screaming pain, the kind of suffering that most people would consider unbearable. The reattachment surgery, while successful in restoring the organ, did not successfully restore comfortable function. So Quagmire's situation after everything that happens in this episode is that he's alive, he has a penis again, but that penis hurts terribly every time he urinates and has a mole that makes women uncomfortable. He's technically better off than he was after the shark attack, when he had no penis at all and was suicidal about it, but he's not restored to his previous condition. He's living with chronic pain during basic bodily functions and with cosmetic damage that affects his ability to pursue the casual sex lifestyle he valued above all else. What makes this episode particularly revealing about Quagmire's character is how it shows just how much of his identity is wrapped up in his hypersexuality. When he loses his penis, he doesn't think, "I still have friends and family who care about me." He doesn't think, "I can find meaning in life beyond sexual activity." He doesn't consider that his value as a person extends beyond his ability to have sex with women. His immediate trajectory after losing his penis is straight towards suicide. He literally cannot conceive of a life worth living if it doesn't include sexual conquest. This goes beyond normal grief over a traumatic injury. People who lose limbs or other body parts often go through stages of depression and adjustment, but most eventually find ways to continue living meaningful lives. They discover new hobbies, they lean on relationships, they find purpose in things they can still do. But Quagmire's response to losing his penis is to plan an elaborate public suicide disguised as a ventriloquism show. He doesn't go through stages of grief, he goes directly from loss to planning his death. The fact that his friends' attempts to lift his spirits completely fail shows how deep this identity crisis goes. Peter, Joe, and Cleveland presumably know Quagmire well. They've been friends for years. They know what he likes, what makes him laugh, what activities he enjoys beyond just sex, but nothing they try works because Quagmire genuinely cannot see a point to living without his hypersexual lifestyle. His entire sense of self is so completely tied to sexual activity that removing that ability removes any reason he can think of to continue existing. The ventriloquism show as a suicide method is particularly dark because it shows premeditation and planning. This isn't someone having a moment of despair and acting impulsively. This is someone creating an entire performance as cover for their planned death. Quagmire put thought into this. He rehearsed. He probably sent invitations. He set up a venue. All of this planning was in service of his suicide, which means he was committed to the idea of dying rather than living without sexual function. The intervention by his friends saves his life but doesn't address the underlying issue. Quagmire's identity and self-worth are built entirely on a foundation of sexual conquest. When that foundation crumbles, so does everything he thinks makes life worth living. Even after Ida gives him her old penis and it's successfully reattached, Quagmire is left with a penis that causes screaming pain during urination and has cosmetic issues that repel women. He has his functionality back, technically, but it comes with severe drawbacks that will affect his quality of life permanently. The episode doesn't show us how Quagmire adjusts to his new reality long term. We don't see whether he eventually comes to terms with having his father's former penis or whether the chronic pain during urination ever improves. We don't know if women eventually overlook the mole or if Quagmire has to accept that his days of casual sexual conquest are limited by his body's visible evidence of trauma. All we know is that Quagmire went from having his penis bitten off by a shark to attempting suicide to receiving his father's old penis as a transplant, and through all of that, his primary concern remained his ability to maintain his hypersexual lifestyle. This episode represents Quagmire going too far, not through his actions toward others, but through the extremity of his own self-destruction when faced with the loss of his sexual function. He literally chose death over living without sex. He planned an elaborate suicide performance rather than seek therapy or try to build an identity beyond his penis. And even after receiving a replacement organ from his father, he's left with chronic pain and cosmetic damage that will forever remind him that his body is no longer what it was. The entire situation reveals that Quagmire's hypersexuality isn't just a character trait or a running gag. It's a genuine addiction or pathology so severe that losing the physical ability to indulge it made him suicidal within what couldn't have been more than a few weeks. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Quagmire's Quagmire, Season 12, Episode 10. Quagmire dates a woman who is basically the female version of himself. Most people who spend their lives treating others badly eventually face some form of consequence or karma. They hurt people, they get hurt back. They manipulate others, they get manipulated in return. It's a pattern as old as human interaction itself. But when Quagmire finally meets someone who matches his energy, someone who shares his extreme sexual appetites and willingness to cross boundaries, he discovers something terrifying. He's not actually prepared for what it feels like to be on the receiving end of the kind of behavior he's been dishing out for decades. The woman he thinks is his soulmate turns out to be someone who drugs him, beats him, kidnaps him, and keeps him locked in a storage container for days while physically and sexually abusing him, to the point where his friends have to stage a rescue operation. The whole situation starts innocently enough, with Peter and Joe helping Quagmire pick out a new computer. This is normal friend behavior, helping someone shop for technology they don't understand. Quagmire gets his new computer home and almost immediately runs into problems. He calls Peter for help finding his pictures, which probably means his extensive collection of pornography that he wants to transfer to the new machine. During this process, Quagmire ends up frying his computer completely. Whatever he or Peter did while trying to access his files caused catastrophic damage that rendered the computer unusable. Quagmire takes the fried computer in for service, which means bringing it to a repair shop where a professional can assess the damage and hopefully recover his data. The clerk who helps him is a woman named Sonia. While examining the computer to diagnose the problem, Sonia discovers Quagmire's tastes in pornography. Most repair technicians would see a customer's porn collection, maybe make a mental note about it, and then professionally pretend they saw nothing while fixing the computer. But Sonia has a different reaction. She sees Quagmire's specific porn preferences, and instead of being disgusted or indifferent, she's intrigued. Sonia and Quagmire end up going on a date. They go out to eat, probably at a nice restaurant where they can talk and get to know each other. During this date, they discover they have a lot in common. The episode specifically states this, suggesting that beyond just shared sexual interests, they connect on multiple levels. They probably have similar senses of humor, similar interests, similar worldviews. For someone like Quagmire, who has spent his entire life pursuing casual sexual encounters without deeper connection, finding someone who actually understands him and shares his interests must feel significant. But the morning after their date reveals that this connection isn't as healthy as Quagmire initially thought. He wakes up handcuffed to the bed, which on its own might be explained as consensual kink between two adults exploring their shared interests. But then comes the disturbing detail. Quagmire discovers he was drugged to have sex. Sonia didn't just handcuff him with his knowledge and consent. She drugged him without his knowledge or consent and then had sex with him while he was incapacitated. That's rape. There's no other word for it. She chemically incapacitated someone and then performed sexual acts on them. Quagmire's reaction to discovering he was drugged and sexually assaulted is deeply troubling. Instead of recognizing this as a massive violation and red flag, he decides that he has finally found his true love. He interprets being drugged and handcuffed as a sign that Sonia is perfect for him, that she understands his desires so completely that she knew exactly what he wanted even before he could express it. This shows how distorted Quagmire's understanding of healthy relationships has become. He can't distinguish between consensual kink and actual assault because his entire framework for sexual interaction is built on boundary violations. Quagmire tells the guys about his new relationship at the Drunken Clam. He's excited, probably going on about how amazing Sonia is and how they're so compatible. But Peter and Joe, despite their own flaws and questionable judgment, recognize that something is wrong here. They caution Quagmire to be careful. They can see red flags that Quagmire either can't see or chooses to ignore. They're trying to warn their friend that this relationship might be dangerous, but Quagmire is too caught up in his excitement about finding someone who matches his sexual energy to listen to their concerns. The relationship continues, and the episode states they engage in a variety of sexual acts, including having sex with his father. This is one of the most disturbing details in the entire episode. Sonia has somehow involved Ida, Quagmire's transgender father, in their sexual activities. This crosses massive boundaries of family relationships and suggests that Sonia is pushing Quagmire into situations that go beyond even his usual willingness to engage in extreme behavior. The fact that this happened shows how much control Sonia has already gained over Quagmire and how far she's willing to go to satisfy her own desires regardless of normal social and familial boundaries. The physical abuse becomes impossible to hide when Peter and Joe discover Quagmire at the Clam with blackened eyes. Not just one black eye, but multiple blackened eyes, suggesting repeated beatings to his face. This is visible evidence that Sonia is physically assaulting Quagmire. Black eyes don't come from rough consensual sex or even from most kink activities. They come from being punched in the face hard enough to cause blood vessels around the eyes to burst and tissue to swell. This is domestic violence, plain and simple. But when Peter and Joe confront Quagmire about his injuries, he dismisses their concerns. This is classic abuse victim behavior. He makes excuses for Sonia's violence. He probably claims it was consensual, or that he wanted it, or that they were just playing around. He's in denial about the fact that he's being abused, possibly because admitting it would mean admitting that he's in a dangerous situation and that his judgment was wrong about Sonia being his true love. It's easier to pretend everything is fine than to face the reality that he's being victimized. After leaving the Clam, the situation escalates dramatically. Sonia meets Quagmire outside, which means she was waiting for him, possibly following him or tracking his movements. She beats him again, this time in public or at least outside the bar where anyone could see. Then she shuts him in the trunk of his car. She's kidnapping him using his own vehicle, trapping him in a confined space where he can't escape or call for help. While doing this, she claims that she is satisfying his fantasies of being dominated and humiliated. This claim is a manipulation tactic that abusers use. By framing her violence and kidnapping as fulfilling Quagmire's desires, Sonia makes it harder for him to recognize or report what's happening to him as abuse. She's gaslighting him into believing that being beaten, kidnapped, and locked in a trunk is something he wanted, something that's part of their shared kink rather than a crime being committed against him. She drives away with him trapped in the trunk, taking him to an unknown location where he'll be completely under her control. Days pass with Quagmire missing. His father, Ida, shows up at Peter's door, expressing concern that Quagmire hasn't been seen for days. For Ida to be worried enough to come to Peter's house means Quagmire has been missing long enough that his disappearance is noticeable and concerning. Joe is also aware that Quagmire hasn't been seen, which suggests that multiple people have been trying to reach him without success. Quagmire hasn't shown up for work, hasn't answered his phone, hasn't been to any of his usual locations. He's completely vanished from his normal life. The guys search for Quagmire by going to all his usual haunts. They check the bars he frequents, the places he picks up women, anywhere they think he might be. But none of these searches turn up any sign of him. They're worried enough now to be actively investigating his disappearance, trying to figure out where he might be or what might have happened to him. The fact that they can't find him at any of his regular locations suggests he's being kept somewhere unusual, somewhere outside his normal patterns. Their search eventually leads them to wander into a seedy area of town. This is not the kind of neighborhood where Peter and Joe would normally go. It's probably full of crime, drugs, prostitution, and other illegal activities. But this is where their search for Quagmire takes them, which tells you something about where Sonia operates and what kind of person she is. When they ask around in this area, they discover that Sonia has a reputation. People in this seedy neighborhood know who she is, which means she's a regular presence in the criminal underworld. She's not just someone who took things too far with one partner. She's someone with a known pattern of behavior. Someone in this seedy area directs Peter and Joe to a storage container. This is where Sonia has been keeping Quagmire for days. Not a house or an apartment, but a storage container, the kind people rent to store furniture or boxes. It's a metal box, probably without windows, without proper ventilation, without bathroom facilities. Quagmire has been locked in this container for days, being held prisoner in conditions that are barely habitable. The fact that Sonia knew to bring him here and that people in the area knew she uses storage containers suggests this is something she's done before. When Peter and Joe find Quagmire in the storage container, they're immediately cornered by Sonia. She was either inside with Quagmire or nearby guarding the location. She takes Joe's gun, which escalates the situation into a life-threatening confrontation. Sonia now has a firearm and is pointing it at the people trying to rescue her victim. She's willing to use violence or the threat of violence to maintain control over Quagmire and to prevent his friends from helping him escape. Joe, as a police officer, has training for situations like this. He calls Sonia's bluff and closes in on her despite the gun pointed at him. This is an incredibly brave move because Joe is in a wheelchair and can't move as quickly or easily as someone on foot. He's putting himself at serious risk by advancing on an armed person. Sonia pulls the trigger, attempting to shoot Joe, but nothing happens. The gun doesn't fire. Joe then reveals why the gun didn't fire. He keeps his gun unloaded following an incident that happened the previous April. The episode doesn't explain what happened in April, but it was apparently serious enough that Joe made the decision to carry an unloaded service weapon, which is extremely unusual for a police officer. This decision probably saved his life in this moment, because if the gun had been loaded, Sonia would have shot him. Joe tackles Sonia, physically subduing her now that she can't shoot him. With Sonia restrained, Quagmire is finally free from her control. Later, after the rescue, Quagmire admits something revealing. He says he'll need to be the really kinky one in his future relationships. This statement shows that Quagmire has learned something from this experience, but maybe not the right lesson. Instead of recognizing that he needs healthier boundaries and better judgment in relationships, he's deciding that he needs to be more extreme than his partners so they can't victimize him the way Sonia did. He's not addressing the root problem of his relationship patterns. He's just adjusting his approach to try to stay on top of the power dynamic. The episode ends with Quagmire worrying about his dad being pregnant. This callback to the earlier disturbing detail about Sonia involving Ida in their sexual activities suggests that the encounter resulted in Ida becoming pregnant. This adds another layer of lasting consequences to Sonia's abuse. It's not just that Quagmire was beaten, kidnapped, and imprisoned. It's that his father was pulled into the situation and now faces a pregnancy that resulted from sexual activities orchestrated by Quagmire's abuser. What makes this episode particularly significant in terms of Quagmire going too far is that for once, Quagmire isn't the perpetrator, he's the victim. His decades of pursuing extreme sexual behavior, violating boundaries, and treating partners as objects rather than people finally led him to someone who did the same things to him. Sonia matched his energy and then exceeded it, showing him what it feels like to be drugged, assaulted, beaten, and imprisoned by someone who claims to be doing it for your own pleasure. The episode reveals how vulnerable Quagmire's extreme lifestyle makes him. His inability to recognize healthy boundaries, his excitement about finding someone who shares his most extreme interests, and his willingness to dismiss obvious warning signs all contributed to him ending up as an abuse victim. Peter and Joe saw the danger and tried to warn him, but Quagmire was so thrilled to find someone who matched his sexual appetites that he ignored all the red flags until he was literally locked in a storage container for days. The fact that Sonia has a reputation in a seedy part of town suggests Quagmire isn't her first victim. She's done this before to other people. She has a pattern of finding partners, overwhelming them with shared interests and sexual compatibility, and then escalating to drugging, beating, and imprisoning them. Quagmire walked right into a predator's trap because he was too excited about finding his true love to recognize that someone can share your interests while still being dangerous. This episode shows that going too far isn't just about harming others, it's also about creating patterns of behavior that eventually harm yourself. Quagmire spent decades treating sex as a game, where he tried to get as much as possible from as many people as possible without regard for their feelings or boundaries. When he finally met someone who approached sex the same way he did, he discovered that being on the receiving end of that treatment means being drugged, beaten, kidnapped, and kept in a storage container while your abuser justifies everything as fulfilling your fantasies. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Must Love Dogs, Season 21, Episode 11. Quagmire falls in love with a woman who has dozens of dogs. Most people who discover their date has a passion they don't share would either be honest about it or politely move on to someone more compatible. If you hate dogs and meet someone whose entire life revolves around dog rescue, the reasonable response is to acknowledge the incompatibility and wish them well. But Quagmire apparently looked at that straightforward situation and decided the better option was to construct an elaborate lie about loving dogs, recruit Brian to pose as his pet, and then propose marriage to a woman while maintaining a deception so transparent that it eventually collapses under the weight of multiple rescue dogs moving into his house. That's not just going too far. That's building an entire relationship on a foundation of lies and then acting surprised when reality comes crashing through the door with fur and barking. The whole situation starts innocently enough during trick-or-treat night. Halloween is one of those community events where neighbors interact more than usual, where adults escort children around the neighborhood collecting candy, and where chance encounters can happen naturally. Quagmire meets a woman who is escorting her niece around for trick-or-treating. She's being a good aunt, taking her niece out for Halloween, making sure the kid has a fun and safe experience. This is normal, wholesome behavior that suggests this woman is caring and family-oriented. Quagmire and this woman hit it off during their brief Halloween encounter. They probably chat while the kids collect candy, exchange phone numbers, maybe make jokes about the costumes they're seeing. There's chemistry between them, enough that they both want to see each other again beyond this chance meeting on Halloween night. For Quagmire, who typically pursues women for quick sexual encounters without deeper connection, hitting it off with someone suggests there might be potential for something more substantial than his usual pattern. They arrange a breakfast date, which is a relatively wholesome and low-pressure way to get to know someone better. Breakfast dates happen in daylight, in public places, without the expectations or complications that come with dinner and drinks. It's the kind of date people choose when they want to actually talk and learn about each other, rather than just escalate toward physical intimacy. During this breakfast date, Quagmire discovers something important about this woman. She's a dog lover, not just someone who thinks dogs are cute or who has one pet. The episode specifically identifies her as a dog lover, someone whose identity and lifestyle revolve significantly around dogs. This revelation puts Quagmire in a decision point. He could be honest and say something like, "I'm not really a dog person myself, but I'm glad you have that passion." He could ask questions about her interest in dogs to see if it's something he could learn to appreciate. Or he could recognize that someone who is a serious dog lover probably needs a partner who shares or at least supports that passion, and acknowledge that they might not be compatible. Those are the honest, mature options that respect both people's time and feelings. Instead, Quagmire decides to pose as a dog lover himself. He chooses deception over honesty, convincing this woman that he shares her passion for dogs when he actually doesn't. This is relationship fraud at its most basic level. He's misrepresenting a fundamental aspect of his personality and interests to make himself seem compatible with someone he's attracted to. He's starting a relationship based on a lie, which means any connection they build will be built on false pretenses. Quagmire briefly considers buying a dog to support his lie. This would at least show some commitment to the deception, some willingness to actually live with the consequences of his false claim to love dogs. Getting a dog is a significant responsibility. It requires daily care, financial investment, time commitment, and lifestyle adjustments. Most people think carefully before getting a dog because it's a multi-year commitment to another living creature. But Quagmire is considering it purely as a prop for his lie, a way to make his false identity as a dog lover seem more credible. But buying and caring for an actual dog seems like too much work for Quagmire. Instead, he comes up with what he thinks is a brilliant solution. He approaches Brian about posing as his dog. He's asking Brian, who is technically a dog but lives as a member of the Griffin family, to pretend to be Quagmire's pet dog to help maintain his lie to this woman. It's a deeply strange request that shows how far Quagmire is willing to go to avoid just being honest about not liking dogs. Brian's initial reaction to Quagmire's request is to enjoy a good laugh at his expense. Brian understands immediately how absurd and desperate this plan is. He can see that Quagmire has dug himself into a hole with his lies and is now trying to recruit help to maintain the deception instead of just coming clean. Brian laughs because it's genuinely funny that Quagmire thinks this plan will work, that Brian pretending to be his pet will somehow convince this woman that Quagmire is a legitimate dog lover. Despite his amusement, Brian agrees to participate in Quagmire's scheme. His price is 6 tennis balls, which is a joke about dog toys and also shows that Brian isn't taking this seriously. He's not agreeing because he wants to help Quagmire build a healthy relationship. He agrees because he thinks it will be entertaining to watch what happens. The episode specifically states that Brian admits he's really just waiting to see Quagmire crash and burn. Brian knows this plan is doomed to fail, and he wants a front row seat to the disaster. As Quagmire starts spending time with this woman while maintaining his dog lover persona, the relationship progresses. Instead of the lie becoming harder to maintain and causing Quagmire to come clean, he doubles down on the deception. Brian admits that he's helping things along, presumably making the situation more complicated or pushing events forward faster than they would naturally progress. Brian isn't trying to help Quagmire succeed in his deception. He's actively trying to accelerate the timeline to when the whole thing falls apart. Then Quagmire does something that takes this situation from bad to catastrophic. He decides that this woman is the one, his soulmate, the person he wants to spend his life with. This decision is based on a relationship built entirely on lies, where the woman doesn't actually know who Quagmire really is, because he's been pretending to share her biggest passion when he actually doesn't. Quagmire presents an engagement ring to her, proposing marriage to someone who only knows a false version of him. The woman accepts Quagmire's proposal. She says yes to marrying a man she believes loves dogs as much as she does, a man she thinks will be a supportive partner for her rescue dog work and her dog-centered lifestyle. She has no idea that the man she just agreed to marry is lying about one of the most fundamental aspects of their supposed compatibility. She's planning a future with someone based on completely false information about who that person is. After the initial shock of getting engaged, because apparently even Quagmire didn't fully expect her to say yes, Quagmire seems to accept the news well. He's probably in denial about what he's gotten himself into, riding high on the engagement, excitement, convincing himself that he can maintain this lie indefinitely, or that his feelings for her will somehow overcome his actual dislike of dogs. He's committed to marrying someone while maintaining a fundamental deception about his personality, which is a recipe for disaster. The reality of his lie hits when the woman moves in with all of her rescue dogs. The word all is important here because it indicates she doesn't just have 1 or 2 dogs. She has multiple rescue dogs, probably many of them, enough that their presence fundamentally changes the living situation in Quagmire's house. Rescue dogs often come with behavioral issues, trauma, special needs, and require significant time, patience, and care. This isn't like having well-trained family pets. This is like running a dog shelter out of Quagmire's home. The episode states that this situation causes the fur to fly, which is both a literal description of what happens when multiple dogs live in a house and a metaphorical description of conflict and chaos. Quagmire's house is now full of dogs, shedding fur everywhere, barking, needing to be walked and fed and cared for. His furniture is probably destroyed. His sleep schedule is disrupted. His house smells like dogs. Everything he owns is covered in fur, and he can't complain about any of it because he's supposed to be a dog lover who is thrilled about this situation. The disaster reaches its peak during their engagement dinner party. Quagmire and his fiancée are hosting a party to celebrate their engagement with friends and family. This is supposed to be a happy occasion where they share their joy with their community and receive congratulations and support. Everyone is gathered in Quagmire's house, probably eating, drinking, and socializing. Then, Quagmire makes a critical error. He accidentally uses the word walk. For anyone who has spent time around dogs, they know that certain trigger words immediately activate dogs. Walk is one of the most powerful trigger words because dogs associate it with going outside, with exercise and adventure, and all the things that make dogs excited. When Quagmire says walk in a house full of rescue dogs, it causes a stampede. Multiple dogs all react simultaneously, rushing toward the door or toward Quagmire, or just running around in excitement because they think they're going for a walk. The chaos of multiple large animals all moving at once in an indoor space causes destruction and panic. The party is ruined by the dog stampede. Guests are probably knocked over or frightened. Food and drinks are spilled. Furniture is damaged. The celebratory atmosphere is completely destroyed by the chaos of multiple dogs reacting to a trigger word. This is the moment when Quagmire's lie becomes unsustainable. He can't pretend anymore that he's comfortable with this situation, that he loves dogs, that he's happy to build a life surrounded by rescue animals that respond to trigger words with stampedes through his house. Quagmire finally reaches his wit's end. After weeks or months of maintaining the lie, after getting engaged, after letting his fiancée move in with all her rescue dogs, after watching a dinner party turn into a dog stampede, he breaks. He admits the truth. He tells his fiancée that he really hates dogs. Not just that he's not a dog person, or that he's finding the adjustment difficult. He hates dogs. Everything he told her about loving dogs, everything their relationship was built on regarding this shared interest, was completely false. This admission breaks up the relationship. The woman realizes that the man she agreed to marry, the man she thought shared her passion and would support her rescue work, has been lying to her the entire time. He doesn't just not love dogs, he hates them. Every moment they spent together discussing dogs, every time he pretended to be interested in her rescue work, every interaction with her animals was all an act. The foundation of their relationship was a lie, and she ends things immediately because she can't trust someone who would deceive her so completely about something so fundamental. Quagmire's response to the relationship ending is not to feel guilty about his deception or to reflect on why he thought lying was a better option than honesty. Instead, he vows revenge on Brian. He blames Brian for the relationship failing, even though Brian's only role was to go along with Quagmire's terrible plan. Quagmire doesn't take responsibility for creating this situation through his own lies. He decides that Brian is somehow at fault and needs to be punished. He goes for a walk, leaving Brian alone in the house, which sets up whatever revenge Quagmire has planned. The episode later shows that Quagmire's revenge involves Seamus showing up at Brian's door with a bloated screenplay for him to read. This means Quagmire arranged for Seamus to write an extremely long, probably terrible screenplay and deliver it to Brian, knowing that Brian will feel obligated to read it out of politeness or professional courtesy. It's a petty revenge that wastes Brian's time, but doesn't actually address the real issue, which is that Quagmire destroyed his own relationship through dishonesty. What makes this episode particularly representative of Quagmire going too far is the extent of the deception and how long he maintained it. He didn't just lie on one date and then feel guilty. He built an entire relationship on lies, got engaged to someone based on false pretenses, let that person move in with all their rescue animals, and planned to marry them while knowing the whole foundation was fraudulent. He was willing to potentially spend his life maintaining this lie, living with dogs he hated, pretending to be someone he wasn't, rather than just be honest from the beginning. The woman in this situation is the real victim. She opened her heart to someone she thought shared her values and passions. She agreed to marry someone she thought would be a partner in her rescue work and her life with dogs. She moved into his house with her animals, probably making plans for their future together. Then she discovered that the person she loved didn't actually exist. The dog-loving man she fell for was completely fabricated. The real Quagmire hates the thing she's most passionate about and lied about it for months. This episode also shows how Quagmire's pattern of viewing women as conquests rather than people extends even into his attempts at serious relationships. He wanted to date this woman, so he lied about who he was to make that happen. He didn't think about whether they were actually compatible or whether she deserved to know the truth about her partner. He just wanted what he wanted and was willing to deceive someone completely to get it. When the deception became unsustainable, he blamed everyone except himself. The irony of Quagmire hating dogs is particularly rich, given that his own behavior throughout Family Guy has been animalistic and predatory. He spent years treating women as objects, pursuing sexual gratification without regard for others' feelings, and generally behaving worse than most actual animals do. His hatred of dogs, creatures known for loyalty and unconditional love, reveals something about his character. He can't appreciate genuine affection or commitment, whether from animals or apparently from romantic partners, because his entire worldview is built on deception and selfish gratification. This episode represents Quagmire going too far because he took a simple incompatibility, not liking dogs, and turned it into relationship fraud that ended with a woman discovering her entire engagement was built on lies. He recruited others into his deception, maintained it through an engagement, and only confessed when the lie became physically unsustainable due to a house full of rescue dogs. Then, instead of apologizing or taking responsibility, he blamed Brian and plotted petty revenge. That's not just going too far. That's revealing a fundamental inability to have honest relationships or take accountability for your own destructive choices. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.